Good afternoon, morning, evening, or night. My name is Astile Doherty, and this is a video I've been very excited to make. This is my official 2019 list video, where I'm going to be going through all the movies that I saw in 2019, or from 2019, maybe just as this year was beginning, or maybe even just before, in 2018. Maybe I caught a 2019 movie before that, you never know. So this is just a rundown. I'm going to be going from worst at the very bottom all the way to the best at the very top to my personal favourite film of the year. I have a few rules for this video. If I've talked about a movie before, I'm going to leave a link in the description below to that video where I talked about that movie. If it's a movie that I have a lot more to say about and I want to make a video on, I'm going to save it for the future and just give a brief description. I've assigned a one-word review for every movie, and I'm actually going to talk about it in detail. If I'm not talking about it in the future, I haven't already talked about it. And yeah, I just hope we have a good time. Also going to be leaving a link to my Letterboxd reviews so you can read the full multi-paragraph stuff, maybe read into some stuff that I didn't mention, and yeah, just have a fun old time. Also worth noting that I am going to be changing environments every now and then. The quality of my hair might be a bit different. My outfits will completely change just to make the video somewhat more visually interesting, and also a pathway for me just filming this at different times because busy life, busy video, probably over an hour long, who knows. I saw 90 films, so it's a lot to go through, so let's just get started. Number 90 is Loqueesha, which was written and directed by a fucking hack whose name is Jeremy Saville. Loqueesha was easily the worst film of 2019 for me. I've already talked about it before on this channel. The one word I use to describe it is trash. It is just garbage. I don't recommend anyone watches it. I will never watch it again. My opinions on it haven't changed, really, and that's pretty much all I have to say about it. I gave Loqueesha a 1 out of 10. Just literally no doubt about it. A 0 if that was possible. Number 89 is Cats, which was directed by Tom Hooper. The one word I used to describe Cats was unforgivable, because that is just what it is. Already made a video on Cats, blew up like a motherfucker, very happy about that. There are a few things that I didn't mention, such as the really scary looking black lady who has that big finale song, which was just awful. Judi Dench's hands not even being animated, the magician's hand not even being animated. It's genuinely that they just didn't even try at all. I do think it's a shame that this was not nominated for any Academy Awards, but the Oscars do not care about horror movies, so that sucks. I gave Cats a 1 out of 10 and my rating has not changed. That is how I stand on it. Number 88 is The Haunting of Sharon Tate, which was directed by Daniel Farrands. By far the most cynical, boring, misguided attempt at a horror movie I've seen so far in my life. Almost embarrassing to even think about and acknowledge it exists. One word I would use to describe this movie is tasteless, completely insensitive and almost offensive in its portrayal of such a horrific event in the history of like real life murders, especially that bullshit haunting aspect it takes. Not to mention Hilary Duff somehow makes sympathetic figures punchable through the entire thing, but in her defense, no one else is really capable of receiving an Oscar here. And the jump scares, the fucking pointless, boring, irritating fucking jump scares, and the completely visually unappealing depiction of Charles Manson, stupid character behaviour and decision making, and just awful all the way through. Everyone knows when making one of these movies, you gotta have those CGI maggots, flies, and blood. And like I said, totally tasteless in its portrayal of a brutal murder done over some kind of record deal screw-up, with the main motivation being to start a race war. I could feel the anger on my face. Avoid this movie or be destroyed. I'm giving The Haunting of Sharon Tate a 1 out of 10. Number 87 is Ma, which was directed by Tate Taylor. The one word I would use to describe this movie is repugnant. If I had to name a horror movie worse than Cabin Fever 2016 or the atrocious birthday party segment from XX, this might actually be it. I consider The Haunting of Sharon Tate to be more of a comedy, but this actually comes across as more unfunny, so it is effectively more of a horror film, I guess. Ma does so many things wrong and nothing really all that good. All I can say is Octavia Spencer was clearly having a good time making it, but not enough of a good time where I can give her performance any significant praise whatsoever. The teenage characters and actors were unlikable and awful, the other actors were all really bad, the dialogue ranged from bland as fuck to just straight up terrible, the editing was awful, the camera work was flat, the score was atrocious. I had a miserable but also kind of fun time watching this movie, and I did laugh at some truly embarrassing things about it. But I wouldn't say it classes itself as a so bad it's funny movie. Like, The Room is funny because it has you laughing consistently all the way through. Mar just had me going, ah! Every now and then. My personal favourite moment where a character who was set up as being so unbelievably annoying in the brief time she's on screen got hit by a car and Ma herself just called her a cunt. Whether that be a genuine laugh or not, the tone of the film is so confused, I really have no fucking idea. But it did get a genuine laugh out of me. Every character just flip-flopped in attitude. No one just used the working mobile phones that, yes, never broke or got cut off or anything in any way whatsoever. Just call the fucking police when necessary. No, you're obviously not going to do it. The choices they made were abysmal and almost frustratingly stupid and unrealistic. Their motivations were selfish and unbearable. The romance between the lead and the "OMG, he's so cute" guy was cringeworthy. It was also kind of pointless. Ma herself was a fucking annoying character with a really drawn out and formulaic as fuck backstory. Giving this movie a tiny bit of credit, but then immediately taking it away after a big realization. There is a scene where I genuinely thought it would be some awful romance subplot attempt where the lead kid's dad takes Ma out for a drink, but then reveals he had a tracking device on the van and knows all about his son going to her house. At first I thought it was a genuine twist that caught me off guard, but then I remembered that it was established earlier and I just didn't give a shit. Why didn't you just follow him there the first few times or send the police like you did when they were drinking in the middle of some rocks earlier? There's literally a scene where the main characters are just having a drink and a smoke around some fucking rocks and a bonfire, and you sent the police for them then, but you didn't send the police to Ma's house. Like, she could be a dangerous woman for all you fucking know, you retard. There are a bunch of minor details that just piss me off thinking about them. Like, why does Ma's daughter have this gate keeping her locked with an easy, accessible lock that she can just open from the inside? Why weren't the kids choking and collapsing from the fumes in the basement fire? Why was the Ma high school photo recreation scene from the trailer so fucking underwhelming? Why didn't Ma cut off the dad's dick, which would have made the scene somewhat interesting, but then instead just injected his veins with dog blood? Would that even work? Why was Ma never fired for being such a shitty vet? Why didn't this stupid fucking main character just report her as soon as she started messaging her with a new unknown number? Fuck this movie. Fuck anyone who paid to see it. And oddly enough, don't fuck Jason Blum. Because at the end of the day, he's just a very respectable businessman getting butts in the seats. If he wants to make horror movies more marketable so we can actually get something good once in a blue moon, then I say go ahead, but just be a tiny bit more caring in the future. 1 out of 10. Number 86 is Aladdin, which was directed by Guy Ritchie. Oh. What happened in your life, man? Fucking awful. Avoid at all costs, okay? Blue Will Smith is the best part of this film. Think about that. The one word I use to describe it is soulless. It does not have a soul. 1 out of 10. Number 85 is The Lion King, which sits at a perfect 6.9 on IMDb and was directed by Jon Favreau. Yes, Jon Favreau of Chef and Iron Man. Genuinely hyped for the YMS video. It's going to be a banger. The one word I would use to describe The Lion King is miserable. I will admit that when I first went to see it, I thought very little to nothing of it. I just thought, this is just a shot-for-shot remake of The Lion King. So what I did was I went home, I watched the original Lion King, which was infinitely more enjoyable, and that literally just dragged the film down for me. It was just miserable, awful, pointless especially, but I am genuinely impressed by what they can do. I do have to give them some credit for that. And I appreciate the fact James Earl Jones is in the movie. I kind of like Donald Glover as Simba, and I think Seth Rogen as the Warthog is just kind of funny. I gave The Lion King a 2 out of 10, though it's probably closer to a 1 than a 3.
Number 84 is Cuck, which was directed by Rob Lambert.
Already talked about this movie. Thumbs up to my boy Matty, who has seen it. I do not know a single other person who has seen this movie. One word I would use to describe it is incel. It is very much an incel movie. I gave it a 2 out of 10. It's probably closer to a 1 than a 3. It's just an experience.
Number 83 is Six Underground, which was directed by Michael Bay.
What a fucking atrocious film! Laughably bad moments combined with some fun gore does not excuse the painfully average acting, especially the generic performance from a usually kind of alright Ryan Reynolds, pointless objectification and sexualization of women, some racial stereotyping, unfunny jokes, signature overuse of explosions and headache-inducing action sequences, failure to tug at the heartstrings, generic and predictable story with a family is an important element to it, awful editing, questionable music choices with a self-awareness at one point that's ultimately made pointless by continuing with the song anyway, and just a forgettable experience where I was mostly playing Star Wars Battlefront 2. I did have a right hearty laugh going back a few seconds to acknowledge terrible dialogue, continuity and action that I thought I must have misheard, surely. Can't really say I recommend this one. Not even as it's so bad it's good. It's just fucking annoying. Waste of money. Fuck you, Michael Bay. That Lobo film finna be lit though. Naturally, the only word that can be used to describe this movie is explosive. And I'm giving this one a 2 out of 10.
Number 82 is Glass, which was directed by M. Night Shyamalan. Great.
Glassy. I genuinely can't think of another word to describe this movie other than comical. So, as far as it goes with trilogies, third films tend to be considered either the absolute worst or simply of slightly lower quality. Glass is no exception to this rule. There are some things I like about it. I thought that Samuel Jackson was enjoyable but also kind of weird, and James McAvoy was brilliant. There are some genuinely interesting ideas, particularly to do with the execution of the ending and how the world comes to view superheroes despite best efforts at the hand of this stupid cult to keep them under wraps. They use nostalgic clips from Unbreakable that help connect to the currently told story. That's honestly about it with this movie. Everything else in the film is either really, really dumb or just extremely disappointing. Bruce Willis wasn't very good. Spencer Treat Clark, who they got to come back from Unbreakable, was pretty bland. And I didn't believe a single word that came out the mouth of Sarah Paulson. Not only did the dialogue suck and was really on the nose and annoying all the time, but it hardly felt like she or many of the other actors were even really trying. Anya Taylor-Joy didn't do the worst job, but she was given fuck all to do. M. Night Shyamalan himself made a cameo, and the dialogue he wrote and delivered for himself was awful. The cheerleading girls were fucking annoying, and I kind of wanted the beast to massacre them and eat their flesh. On a visual level, the film was pretty flat, especially compared to the previous two movies. During the clips of Unbreakable, it not only sucked to see Bruce Willis and the kid, Spencer Treat Clark, be good, but it also sucked to see how much better the presentation was in Unbreakable. What made it even worse was they added in some decent shots that felt really post-production-y, almost as if they realised how flat everything was. The score was atrocious and forgettable. There were a bunch of things that just didn't make any sense. Not only was the sensory light thing nonsensical and far-fetched as fuck, but all the Horde had to do was... This has become a meme at this point. What do you do when flashing lights does something bad to you? You do that, okay? It's not that hard. Go fucking beast mode with the pillow on your face and just bash the door down. That would be really fucking cool. They also ruined the metaphorical nature of David Dunn's water weakness by literally turning it into his kryptonite. It worked in the original because he couldn't swim, and it was a genuinely clever psychological and physical twist on the whole superhero having a defined weakness thing. But in this movie, they fucking ruin it and make it too much like an actual comic book movie, which is something that doesn't match the tone at all, especially of the previous two movies. They just throw him in a puddle and he just dies. The Beast just deciding to collaborate with Elijah made little sense. Realistically, it would have broken every glass bone in his body given the first chance, but it doesn't until it realizes Elijah was responsible for the death of Kevin's dad. It, for some reason, cared about its host enough to just punch him a couple times so he falls off his wheelchair and just dies. There were tons of really lame and unfunny moments that were supposed to be serious and dramatic, and some pointlessly cringy scenes. I kid you not, there's straight up a scene where Dunn's dad explains what the Salt Bay meme is, which is something even I haven't fucking heard of. I also found it fucking weird that Elijah's mother, who was like in her 40s in the decades ago flashbacks, looks almost younger than her supposed son in his late 70s. It was just lazy. It's unbelievably goofy, which is the opposite of what this film was clearly going for. It felt like almost nothing even really happened. The opening of the film was confusing and it took like 20 minutes before it became remotely interesting. The trailer basically lies and makes it out as though the psychiatric ward is pretty major and hints at a more like psychological experience, but it wasn't that at all. It really felt just long and drawn out. The supposed anti-hero mentality asylum also lacked any decent security. It was really easy for this crippled, paper-boned man to just wander around the sabotage his own lobotomy, as well as live leak all the shit that happened. There were some incredibly annoying shots of characters' faces up close with a camera attached to their chest that reminded me of the very intentionally comedic moments from Get Him to the Greek, but it wasn't supposed to be funny. There was also a hilariously awful comedic POV shot of a SWAT guy getting eaten by the beast. So the point of the story is this cult of people are trying to convince superpowered people that people with superpowers don't have them, because if there's no superheroes, there won't be any people to oppose them, and everything in the world should just be hunky-dory. Great! That makes little sense. It wouldn't be as bad if the script didn't treat the audience like we're fucking idiots and explain the twist of the film to us. It also doesn't make any sense they lock up Elijah because they're scared he'll make people realise they're super, but you don't lock Casey up and actually let her closely interact with and encourage Kevin? Okay, I guess. What I don't understand is why waste all this time and money emotionally tormenting these guys and not just kill them. They easily could have lied at any moment and just went on their merry way. I guess super IQ Elijah just didn't figure that out for some reason. The way Dennis and Kevin die is really fucking lame. The beast lets its guard down and just gets shot in the stomach, and Dennis just fucking drowns in a puddle. He can't fight back with his super strength due to the weakening water kryptonite. The fight scenes also sucked and were boring as hell, with some funny moments in the warehouse sequence. There were some genuinely creepy moments, but other than that, it's essentially nothing. I'm going to give Glass a 2 out of 10. I misspelled the beast as beats a lot. Don't know why I did that. Number 81 is Airplane Mode. Let's be honest, do you really care who was responsible for this one? One word to describe this movie is savage. Talked about it already. Garbage. 2 out of 10. Number 80 is Escape Room, which was directed by Adam Robitel. The only word I can really use to sum up this movie is stupid. I love horror movies. Two of my particular favourites include the original Saw movie and Cube, which might be getting their own videos in the future, by the way. And this movie often reminded me of both of them and how much better they are on just about every level. This movie is fucking something, I guess. My biggest problem with this movie was the characters and their attitude. Every time, especially during the first 20 minutes or so, every single word had me just going, what the fuck is your problem? This is yet another film my mother watched with me out of pity, and she did not like it either, and she fucking loves everything. Not only was the acting bland as hell, especially during one scene where Jason was supposed to be showing emotion, but the characters just weren't anyone I cared about. Zoe was fucking annoying, Ben was sometimes kind of cool, but mostly just an asshole with a stupid arc conclusion. Jason was a dick, Mike was arguably the least unlikable, although he managed to be irritating sometimes. Danny was fucking dorky and annoying, and Amanda was just not interesting. They shove in her Iraq war backstory out of nowhere, and to make it 11 times more insufferable, the characters all act like they're best buds and not like they just met, except maybe for like 5 minutes. They always seem to just get along, with Jason being the only exception due to what a dick he is. It tries to somewhat justify their behavior by revealing their tragic backstories. They comically reveal Mike, Jason, Ben, and Zoe's all at the same time, and Danny's is barely touched upon beyond reasoning why something has to happen to Zoe and conclude the film. It's really badly edited at points, and the cinematography and color palette are
fucking boring with one kind of interesting shot. The camera like goes upside down with an upside down room and it follows a woman's trail. It's actually kind of cool. They already remove any intrigue from the film by instantly revealing what happens to one of the main characters towards the end at the beginning. And when we finally reach that moment, they cop out and have him survive in a surprisingly kind of smart way to do with a shield and a fireplace. The actual character setup scenes are fucking boring and we don't even see Mike, Danny or Amanda before arriving at the building, and all of them, except Mike and Zoe, are fucking assholes or just awkward to listen to and watch. The actual puzzles and the way they comically tied into the personal lives of the victims were slightly clever, although also kind of dumb, especially the reindeer one. How the fuck do they know all this really specific and impossible to know shit? Oh yeah, the epic reveal is fucking stupid and the worst kind of sequel bait imaginable. The ending starts off corny, becomes dumb, and ends with a laugh. The actual escape rooms were kind of cool. One is an upside down room that actually provides some interesting shots I mentioned earlier, but it's full of the characters acting like assholes. There's an ice lake simulation room that has a fucking impossible challenge to melt a block of ice with a key in the middle. Just fucking piss on it or smash it really, really hard, instead of subjecting yourself to hypothermia and being completely fine as soon as you enter the next room. What? There's also the furnace room, which should have dehydrated and killed them in fucking minutes, and Danny actually acknowledges the bad writing by pointing out how he escaped just as the final flame went off. The hospital room scene was fucking annoying and Mike's death was utterly ridiculous. The whole breathing mask and "survive, bitch" moment was fucking ridiculous and cringeworthy. Like, how did this girl, foaming at the mouth, on the floor, defeated, grab a hold of an oxygen mask a ways away and survive? Fuck you. The big reveal of the guy behind this particular game was badly edited, shot, and Zoe was just acting like a professional handgun FBI agent for some reason. Also, I'm just gonna say it, even though it was probably supposed to be scary, the acid trip black and white optical illusion sequence was fucking amazing and had me laughing along with it and actually enjoying myself after being mostly bored for a while. This is one of the most tame horror movies I've ever seen. Barely anything happens, there's a decent amount of death and somewhat unique kills, but they're actually really fucking lame in their execution. Concept over execution, am I right, people? It's as simple as eluded drowning, long fall, shot off screen, and hit on the head while on what's probably acid. Also, why the fuck did Zoe wait 24 fucking hours before the police finally made their way to the building, found it abandoned, destroyed, and then allowed them to leave? I'm assuming she told them as soon as this shit was over, or at least I fucking hope she thought to do that. So why the fuck did they take so long? It was pretty funny. This movie kind of sucks and I don't think you should watch it, although definitely check out the acid trip scene on its own if you really must, especially while high. Also, just a warning, which the film does not have, but epilepsy alert. This is why I'm happy Sky has the exact same "Sky has rated the following film" nerd who then reads "flashing images" as being one of the reasons this is the age it is. This is a dumb movie that lacks any true passion thanks to the extra special Sony touch, and you should not see it unless you want Saw for babies and an equal amount of unintentional laughs to be had. And I'm giving this one a 3 out of 10. Number 79 is Men in Black International, which was directed by F. Gary Gray. I remember almost absolutely nothing about this movie. In fact, the one word I used to describe it is forgettable, because as soon as I saw it, I basically forgot what happened. I will admit the little guy is absolutely amazing. I don't think there was a complete lack of chemistry between the two main characters. Like, there was something there, I guess. Liam Neeson is always fun to watch. Some of the action was just kind of goofy and fun. I like the backup dancing guys who do this weird shit. And of course, they're not actually the main villains. There's a deeper plot. I genuinely didn't see the twist coming. I guess I'm just kind of stupid. But I can remember so little about this movie. It's just a forgettable experience. Like, charismatic guy, smart woman, a bunch of other cliche characters that you don't even really care about. I guess one or two kind of interesting payoffs to setups. Like, they cared while making the movie, even if they didn't really do a great job, but I really can't say I recommend it. I give it a 3 out of 10. Number 78 is Pet Sematary 2019, which was directed by Kevin Kolsch and Dennis Widmeyer. My dilemma is I'm actually quite a big fan of the original Pet Sematary, so I should be some kind of expected automatic fanboy, but my problem is that this movie doesn't really do anything all that well. I don't think as a remake or just another adaptation of the same source material. The acting is kind of bad and
it almost feels forced sometimes. I thought the little boy was kind of okay, but he's like a baby, so he doesn't even have to do that much. The little girl was really bad. The old man was kind of bland, but he had a little shine every now and then, the kind of charismatic old man neighbor kind of guy. I inherently find kids quite creepy, so those weird little kiddos walking around with those creepy masks on was actually kind of creepy, I guess. There are some moments here and there where you're like, ooh, and you do get a little bit jittery, like when they show the flashbacks of her dying sister and stuff like that. The practical effects in this movie are actually pretty good. The truck crashing sequence, while a little bit over the top, is kind of cool, I guess. There's a bit of tension in there. The film is kind of bland and just lifeless, which would normally be a good thing for a horror movie, but in this instance it just kind of ruins the experience. There are some genuinely funny moments, like I found myself laughing at some of the line delivery and some of the general stuff that happened. I do think the ending did leave a genuinely kind of really dark, morbid kind of hint, and I guess it was effective to some degree. I really hope this isn't the start of like a new Pet Sematary line, because like I said, I am a fan of the first two, and I feel like that was kind of a good place to end that particular property. I think the one word I would probably use to describe this movie is sleepy, because I actually watched it quite late at night and I was very tired, and usually I'm okay with that as long as a film is exciting, but this movie just bored me. I can't really say that much about it, to be honest. I'd probably give it a 3 out of 10. Giving it the benefit of the doubt, it's probably closer to a 4 than a 2, because it does do something right with what it's given.
Number 77 is The Fanatic, which was directed by Fred Durst.
One word I use to describe this movie is embarrassing to literally every degree. I have a lot more to say about it in the future, though. It's a 3 out of 10. Stay tuned.
Number 76 is Frozen 2, which was directed by Chris Buck and Jennifer Lee. Genuinely, the only word I could think of to describe this movie was just ugh. What's funny about this movie is that the only reason I was gonna give it a 4 out of 10 is because not only was I genuinely unsure if it was that or a 3 out of 10, but I didn't have any 4 out of 10s on my 2019 list at the time, so I thought I'd really take into consideration the things I kind of liked and think about it as nicely as possible. It did not work. Also, I had a really fun plan when me and my friend were gonna watch it simultaneously at different locations and then phone each other and talk about it, but she genuinely had nothing to say about it, so I guess that already speaks for itself. I think the biggest issue with this movie is it just doesn't need to be here, for God's sake. I get it, Frozen was a massive success, but that's because it was a semi-original idea, and that's what people want. They want something new and creative, not bland and stupid. I kid you not, the best part of this entire movie is Elsa seeing an icy version of herself singing Let It Go and cringing at it. That scene genuinely made me smile. I cannot smile any wider at a very short sequence in a painfully long movie. Speaking of which, every song is really lame and pales in comparison to even the worst of Frozen's original songs. There are some nice instrumentals, catchy tunes and lyrics, not awful singing, and of course great production value behind it. I mean, it's Disney, right? What little good these songs do, it kind of crashes and burns and becomes fucking annoying and not very memorable. The worst example is when you think it's going to be a reindeer ukulele song reprisal from the first film, but instead it becomes something completely different. Since that song is my personal favourite from the first film, this was especially disappointing. This film also struggles horribly with characters. Anna and Olaf were fucking annoying, and I wasn't sad when Olaf died, but I kind of died inside when he came back. How fucking predictable. Kristoff wasn't the worst, but he basically had nothing to do. The running gag about his failed proposal and the payoff were just so lame and tiresome. A whole bunch of new characters show up and do almost nothing except maybe the lieutenant and the Gale Wind thing. The lizard did nothing and was just kind of cute and misleadingly bad to begin with. For the first 26 minutes, it felt like nothing was happening. The film wasn't really doing anything remotely interesting except setting up events that show up later and were really uninteresting. The whole Fifth Element thing was hackney and bad and made little sense. I'm just gonna say it. Water and ice are the same fucking thing. The voice acting was really underwhelming. It wasn't bad, but I never got the impression anyone was really trying their hardest as much as they might have cared about this film. I know Anna's voice actress was really excited and desperate to work on a new Frozen movie, so I don't know what went wrong. The final shot of Elsa was, for me at least, probably the worst of the year. It was just so annoying to look at for some reason. As suicidal and cynical as this review may make me sound, I do enjoy some things about this movie besides besides what I briefly mentioned earlier. While not particularly exceptional or interesting, the animation was as per usual really impressive. It was glowy and snowy and fun, and the character designs were pretty good, especially the horse thing. Elsa was pretty hot, although I found it distracting when she just wasn't wearing shoes anymore. Like, it would have been a great opportunity to give us some easily sellable merchandise glass shoe thingies. Did Quentin Tarantino take over at the second half? I'm surprised those earth giants didn't violently kill Charles Manson's cult members. Something extremely underwhelming was the laughable wave sequence from the trailer, which, yes, was way below epic. I'm struggling to remember other things I liked about the movie, but there was one really entertaining, albeit very brief, awkward moment at the very end, as corny as it was. I considered bullet pointing this review, but it's always more fun to write about stuff. I think I found one or two moments charming and funny, and as irritating as Olaf was, he offered some unique visual gags here and there. Just a minor detail, but there was a really weird edit, and for some reason the lieutenant and his soldiers were perfectly in sync, hitting their shields with their swords, when it would have been more interesting to see them clank randomly. There were one or two epic moments, I guess, but that's kind of all there is to say about this dumb movie. Watch it if you're the age of 14 or below, I guess, but otherwise it's probably not something worth $1 billion box office returns, which is more money than I will ever see in my life. And I'm giving this one a 3 out of 10. Number 75 is Captain Marvel, which was directed by Anna Boden and Ryan Fleck. Quite possibly the most bland Marvel movie I've ever seen, and bland is the one word I use to describe this movie. The biggest problem with the film is how genuinely boring and uninteresting it is. This character was so needlessly shoved into this universe with little reason other than they needed another flashy superhero to kick ass and fill in the February-March time slot of 2019 to really cash in on the superhero buzz that plagues society today, much like the westerns of old. Sure, it boasts some decent special effects, and oddly enough kind of impressed me with its level of violence, with many scenes having me go ouch and actually seeing a woman get beaten the shit out of, which is uncommon, but the film just lacks personality, if that makes sense. The cinematography is uninspired, flat, and the Stan Lee cameo even had me rolling my eyes at how on the nose and annoying it was. Sorry, but a Mallrats reference, yes, a Mallrats reference, that fucking hit classic that Stan Lee was in, will not win you Charmer points. Even Captain Marvel's friendly little wink won't win me over. Sorry, Brie Larson, but you ain't got no charm in this one. I actually don't blame her. It's more a fault of the script and direction above all else, both of which felt very lifeless and uninspired throughout. It was nice to see how much fun Samuel Jackson was having playing this younger, cat-loving, more enthusiastic version of his character, and his scenes were some of the only ones that had me chuckling. The weird alien cat monster was pretty cute, funny, although the reasoning behind Fury's missing eye was genuinely lame and, of course, obvious in its little joke about how the cat is cute but the aliens are scared of it. Captain Marvel's outfit, most of the other costumes, the Skrull creatures, and a lot of other aspects of the production were all very impressive, as were a lot of the locations used. But overall, the film looked oddly bland despite these things. One thing I'll give credit is the film never went for the easy to abuse and jarring woman don't need no man slant that it's been memed for. There was actually a use of a song about being a badass girl during a fight scene towards the end that worked really well. There was even a joke I liked involving making Marvel look like a dick that no one on her team liked. Other jokes just missed me completely and actually kind of pissed me off and how unfunny they were. The story was predictable and tiresome. I genuinely called everything that ended up happening, from Jude Law being the actual villain and the Skrulls being good to some ridiculous excuse as to why Captain Marvel was missing for 20 fucking years. Law didn't do the worst job, but his character was so bland. As soon as Marvel said she'd be back whenever she was needed, I said to myself, yeah, when the franchise needs you back. I made it halfway through before falling asleep, but I was able to rewind back to where I was and just about remember everything that happened. My biggest issue with the Captain Marvel character, besides just basically being a bland one-note Marvel Avenger that the script tricks you into believing is charming, is that she's too powerful. She's OP as fuck. I genuinely got upset when she removed that chip thing on her neck and accessed unlimited power. I did genuinely like how she defied Law's character and didn't have to prove anything to that bitch ass. Carol's old friend and her daughter were uninteresting and I didn't care about them. The little girl wasn't very good and neither was Lashana Lynch, I think her name is. I'd say they were pretty wooden and almost awful. I guess the reveal of the Avengers name origin was kind of interesting. It's all a bit too complex for me to understand, so I guess I'll just leave it to the big boy fans to carefully analyze. I didn't hate the film, but I'm pretty sure I'll never lay a single eye on it ever again. It's just a boring mess of a movie that isn't really worth even the most dedicated of Marvel fans' time. I did not enjoy watching it, but I will say that it is worse than Hellboy, but it is much better than Frozen 2. I gave this one a 3 out of 10. Number 74 is Hellboy, which was directed by Neil Marshall. The one word I used to describe this movie is hellish, and it is so entertaining in such a bad way, but also kind of fucking boring and not entertaining at all. It's very much a confusing film to think about. Turns out it's just way too epic and there's way too much to say about it, so expect a video on that in the future.
3 out of 10.
Number 73 is Gemini Man, which was directed by Ang Lee.
Talked about this one before. I have kind of mellowed out in my supposed hatred for it. I do genuinely just think of it as just another generic action movie. I am kind of impressed with what Ang Lee was able to do with this admittedly very weak material. Like I said, Will Smith was genuinely great. Some aspects of it were okay. Most of it was comically bad. Special effects all good except for the scenes in daylight. I have nothing more to add, and it remains a 3 out of 10. One word I use to describe Gemini Man is just kind of silly, I guess.
Number 72 is Brightburn, which was directed by David Yarovsky.
Brightburn is a massive missed opportunity for what could have been a genuinely interesting film, but it's also quite the blessing because it's the first movie in 2019 that I gave 4 out of 10, so I could finally comfortably rest my OCD mind knowing all the numbers are included. Wait, we're talking about Brightburn, right? Yeah, okay. I think I can do this. It was below average. One word I used to describe it is just cool, I guess. Similar to an atrocity such as Aquaman, Brightburn is full of some genuinely cool things I genuinely enjoyed. There's lots of unique, interesting and kind of creepy shots, mainly of the kid when he goes supervillain, donning a genuinely cool costume with glowing red-yellow eyes, which gave me some oddly pleasant flashbacks to Revenge of the Sith when Anakin fell to the dark side. Elizabeth Banks and most of the other actors, such as David Denman, Matt Jones and Gregory Allen Williams, were all pretty great, although Banks definitely stole the show. Even little Emmy Hunter was decent. Not just that, but the Tory character, as well as the characters of the 4 others mentioned, were all somewhat enjoyable to watch on screen, although Sheriff Deaver's time on screen was more limited than I would have appreciated, and Black Guy ended up dead suddenly. What a missed opportunity. I'm sorry, but it is difficult to stay consistently positive for something like this. I thought the overall ideas of this movie were really interesting. It's basically a version of Superman where he grew up to be an edgy, kind of bitchy little butt wipe. Oddly enough, I think this film would have worked much better as a 2.5 hour long character study. I couldn't help but think about how long Man of Steel was and how much more interesting this film could have been, having been given a similar tone. There was a handful of really violent moments such as glass in an eye, 2 cops getting fucking massacred instantly, laser vision death, dissection, hand squeezing, and even face mauling. Some of it was even left to interpretation at moments, and it was effective in some degree. I thought the whole leaving your symbol thing was kind of cool and represented how little of a fuck this kid really gave about being caught because he's just a literal fucking invincible space alien. The final sequence as a whole, if ignoring that annoying death of the sheriff, was pretty epic. There was even a nice little execution to a setup where Tori got a cut on her hand, very similar to the one Brandon got, and it reminded her of what is basically his kryptonite. Nicely done. The climactic plane crash and little shit getting away, Billie Eilish's bad guy over the credits, the Alex Jones type commentator, and of course that slow motion death of our main character who was denying it for so long, but still knew to keep it deep down, are all very effective things that complement the movie nicely. There was one really cool dream sequence that flashed back to when they found him in the pod and we saw the nightmarish thoughts the dad has about this stuff. It was a good scene and I kind of wish the whole movie was like that. For a low-budget superhero horror movie, which there are few of, the production value was pretty great. There's pretty much everything I have to say on the positive side of things. Some parts of this movie were just really, really dumb. They completely forgot about the Caitlyn girl after Brandon freaked her out a couple of times and broke her hand. Brandon himself was fucking annoying to watch and look at, and I didn't understand what the fuck his deal was. We barely knew anything or pretty much absolutely nothing about the family history. It just cut to 10 years later after a slightly effective opening sequence with some videotape family footage. We have no idea if this kid is going through this for the first time, if something similar happened when he was younger, and the reasoning behind his behaviour just doesn't make sense. At first it's like, okay, so he's being possessed by whatever thing his species sent him in, but then he kind of just grows into this evil through very little character progression, and he kind of just becomes a fucking sociopath out of nowhere, killing all and any for the dumbest reasons. Like, it's your counselor's fucking job to report your answers to her questions. Just lie and you say feel bad, you fucking moron, or just slaughter everyone straight away. You clearly want to. What are you about? What is your problem? Is this basic puberty for your species? A lot of this movie is just kind of stupid. They put in these jump scares that don't work with the tone that this film is clearly going for, and just some other dumb shit. Like, there's these bully characters that literally do nothing but throw some insults once or twice. Why did the dad try and shoot his invincible little fucker son that he knew slaughtered a bunch of people? Why the fuck did Tori lift her arm up dramatically and try to kill her kid instead of just stabbing him quickly and quietly? Like, he probably has super reflexes and is genuinely very weak against this fucking material from whatever the fuck he came from. There's also one moment where Elizabeth Banks was very obviously dubbed and they clearly tried to hide it in the shadows, but it just made it more noticeable. The score was fucking annoying and used inappropriately, like in scenes where no score and just the sound of heavy breathing and ominous whispering would have been fine. Tori just went to hanging outside a window in like 3 seconds just as Brandon entered a room. It was so stupid. I guess it would be slightly interesting to see how they expand on this in some kind of continuation, although this definitely would be handled much better if the same idea is tackled differently by another group of people in a decade or so. I still appreciate the effort, and there was clearly some passion put into this film, but it simply isn't enough. If you enjoy movies for concept alone, then I say check this one out. If not, then I really don't fucking know.
Number 71 is Color Out of Space, which was directed by Richard Stanley.
Think maybe The Thing mixed with Mandy and literally any alien horror movie about a family living in a remote location. That is basically Color Out of Space, which I describe with the one word being trippy. I have a bit more to say about it in the future, but for now I would say it's not really a recommendation. But if you are going to go out of your way to see it, then I guess maybe you could get some enjoyment from it, mainly out of Nicolas Cage and some of the sci-fi stuff. But beyond that, there's just not really that much to it. I think I gave it a 4 out of 10.
Number 70 is Le Mans 66, otherwise known as Ford vs. Ferrari, which was directed by James Mangold. Mostly just uninterested throughout, definitely just a tad too long. Bunch of stuff I just didn't really care about at all. Matt Damon and Christian Bale fucking kill it and they work great together. Most of the other actors are pretty great. Racing sequences are pretty exciting and fun to watch. Score was pretty good in a lot of scenes, other times I didn't really care for it. The use of lighting and cinematography aren't anything special. I fell asleep and just couldn't be bothered to go back and watch everything I missed, so I just went back about 2 minutes and skipped through. This is by no means a bad movie. It is simply one I struggle to be at all highly invested in. I'll give it those last 10 minutes though. Kind of Oscar bait. The one word I literally use to describe it is just watched. I remember little else from it other than the fact that I watched it. I'm going to give Ford Ferrari a 5 out of 10, though it's probably closer to a 4 than a 6. Number 69, is Fast and Furious presents Hobbs and Shaw, which was directed by David Leitch. I'm not really a big fan of the Fast and Furious franchise. I'm a somewhat ironic fan of Jason Statham. I am actually kind of a fan of The Rock. Just a kind of dumb, silly movie that I saw, again, last minute with my mum at the Everyman in King's Cross, I think it was. Very obvious sequel bait. Ryan Reynolds shows up and gives a generic performance. It's got some action in it that's enjoyable. It's very silly. The romance between The Rock and that British lady was completely unbelievable. I sensed zero chemistry between them. Just silly, just kind of generic, just kind of, I don't know, to be honest. I think the one word I used to describe it is just dumb. But dumb in a good way, dumb in a highly enjoyable way. Like, I don't regret buying a ticket, you know, and I'd probably watch it again while drunk or high or something. Or maybe completely sober and I'd still have a dumbass old fun time. Lord knows, real Lord really knows. I'm not testing it anytime soon. Idris Elba was actually kind of epic. The action was just unbelievable and just nonsensical and just wild and fun to watch. I gave Hobbs and Shaw a 5 out of 10. Number 68 is The Addams Family, which was directed by Greg Tiernan and Conrad Vernon. The one word I use to describe this movie is decent, because it literally just does not reach any level above decent. The film does offer a lot of that creepy, edgy, charming, perfectly inappropriate Addams Family style that anyone is sure to love about the titular characters, and I do love that about the movie, although it falls flat in terms of a predictable story about being yourself and accepting others, with a villain and a plot so uninteresting and lame, and with such a cliche payoff that it makes you ask why the film didn't just strictly focus on the storyline about Wednesday becoming more preppy in order to go against what her traditional family thinks they all should be, and that same traditional family thing being the exact same thing as each other. There's a lot of humour in this film and use of modern music that really misses the mark, but they kept the actual Addams Family theme before absolutely butchering it in the credits, but it's the credits, so thank all that is unholy for that. I guess the morals are nice if you're a little kid, but it's kind of nice seeing the entire family all together. The voice acting is surface level and sometimes just not very good. Only Nick Kroll could voice a character that flip-flops between being insufferably annoying and kind of ever so slightly charming, and make him sound like Gilbert Gottfried. I really hate a lot of the character designs, but some of them were nice to look at. It's a minor detail, but they give the hand a little eyeball instead of leaving it bland like it should be. Wednesday looked like a weird Coraline Megamind fucked each other hybrid baby thing. The animation went from being decent and cartoony to sometimes being really weirdly just not good. There was one particularly terrible moment where someone got shot by an arrow but not in the mirror right in front of them. The intentionally bland assimilation suburb was kind of a cool choice, I guess, and the actual creepy Addams Family stuff looked kind of cool. Snoop Dogg was an oddly nice inclusion despite him being the paid way too much money to voice a small role voice actor I was fearing the most. Nothing I'd recommend, but if you're great at editing, just take all the weird, edgy Addams Family quirk and put it all together into a fan-made film if you can. You know, still with the genuine, not charming, terrible character designs here and there. And I'm pretty sure this will be a solid 8 out of 10, but for now I'm just going to give it a 5. There are actually a bunch of visual gags and little animation Easter eggs I genuinely appreciated, and what I will say is that they tried, and there's nothing more you can do when working for Sony of all people. Number 67 is The Two Popes, which was directed by Fernando Mireles. I would like to preface this review by saying that while I did enjoy The Two Popes, I just was never really all that invested in what was going on. I enjoyed myself, but at the same time, I didn't really enjoy myself. This film does a lot of things pretty damn well. Since I don't have much of an interest in the actual story, I do automatically have a small bias kind of against the movie, but overall I thought it was told in a slightly interesting way. A bunch of the film is kind of just two old dudes gradually learning to really enjoy each other's company, with one just being a really nice guy and the other being a bit of an uptight older man with a duty he doesn't really want to fulfill due to all the hysteria surrounding it. And he does eventually come to admit that, and the film presents his resignation in a way that doesn't even have subtitles, so we're left to assume what's exactly being said based on reaction, although the film slightly ruins it by just explaining it afterwards. We all know the story, you don't have to explain it to us. The one word I use to describe this movie is just chill, because that is very much what it is. It's a chill time of two old dudes. The film's opening has a fun little joke which they do just repeat towards the end, and it's noticeably different. I would have preferred if that had just happened for the first time during that later section. The opening speech by Bergoglio was accompanied by some neat visuals representing the story he was telling. There was some very charming scenes of a nice use of music, particularly jazz and piano. And the film did this really neat little thing where Bergoglio's life is actually filed and the set design kind of looks like a film made in the 1950s, which was really cool. We do actually get some additional flashbacks detailing Bergoglio's time during the Dirty War, which was interesting, and we even learn that Father Jalix came to forgive him for his lack of involvement. Anthony Hopkins and Jonathan Pryce were brilliant and really matched their assigned characters, although I had some mixed feelings about Hopkins' accent. He sounded less German and more like Anthony Hopkins. The costume design, the recreation of the Sistine Chapel and the location were all genuinely beautiful. The biggest issue with this film is that it's actually very weak visually. The poster seems promising, but most of the cinematography and lighting is TV movie level. Some of the drone shots look really amateur and the editing was straight up bad in in some scenes. There were some well-written moments that got a chuckle out of me, and I genuinely like the football-themed ending after Bergoglio rightfully becomes Pope Francis. There's some clever use of sound, particularly one scene that builds some tension during an argument between Benedict and Bergoglio, where an insect is being really loud in the background. There's a scene where Benedict confesses something to do with the sex scandals surrounding the Catholic faith, but a loud ringing mutes him, which is something very clever to say about not knowing what goes on behind closed doors. There were some genuine chuckle-worthy moments sprinkled throughout, and the film clearly had good intentions and a nice overall tone. They do touch on some of the wrongdoings of the church, and when they do, it fulfills its purpose. I also like how there was actually a point to Benedict's seemingly careless behaviour about Bergoglio's retirement. A lot of scenes are dialogue driven, and it kinda works in the movie's favour, I guess. Check it out if you think it's something that would interest you, although I don't think it will particularly appeal to everyone. If you enjoy a good old-fashioned, not particularly special Saturday afternoon watch, then load up Netflix and go for it. And I'm giving this one a 5 out of 10. It's probably closer to a 6 than a 4.
Number 66 is Pokemon Detective Pikachu, which was directed by Rob Letterman. The one word I would use to describe this movie is Ryan, because Ryan Reynolds quite literally just carries the whole movie. I mentioned in my Letterboxd review, as a gamer, I didn't hate this, smiley face, and as a gamer, I did not hate it. The film is painfully fine. Like, don't get me wrong, there are some genuinely terrible things about it, and there are some genuinely enjoyable things about it, but overall it just kind of equates to just being nothing beyond serviceable. I do actually kind of like the hyper-realistic designs of the Pokemon. I think some of them are actually really cool. I like Charizard, I like the fish, I like the cuddly little monkey guys, I like the big mountain dudes, and I really like the design of Pikachu, and I love the choice of Ryan Reynolds to voice him. I think it works really well. I will say that the main actor is genuinely terrible. I didn't really enjoy him in the Jurassic World movie that came out. Hey, boys scream, that funny, and they do it in this movie as well. The lead girl is also genuinely awful. Bill Nye is always fun to watch, and I thought he did a good job voicing the weird god Pikachu. I'm sorry, I'm not a massive fan, I don't really know.
Oh yeah, Mewtwo. That's it. Mewtwo.
There are so many scenes that are just really boring. There are some scenes that are actually kind of funny and entertaining, and I enjoyed them, such as the mime scene. I thought the whole climactic battle and the gas thing was kind of silly, but also kind of cool, I guess. I genuinely did not see the twist of Ryan Reynolds being his dad coming, although I found it completely unbelievable and stupid because they literally look absolutely nothing alike. I know that's kind of a trend in movies in general, but seriously, no. I don't know why I didn't see it coming. Apparently everyone else did. It was clear as day. One twist I did see coming was that obviously Bill Nye is the actual bad guy. I didn't see the Ditto twist coming, so I guess this movie did do a kind of decent job at tricking me, I guess. I guess maybe I'm just stupid, or I was just so uninvested I wasn't paying that much attention. The movie did make me laugh every now and then. Like I said, very predictable. Definitely never going to watch it again. It was just fine overall. I gave Pokemon Pikachu Detective a 5 out of 10. I don't know why it's better than the Two Popes. I really don't. I guess it was just more mindlessly enjoyable. Number 65 is Yesterday, which was directed by Danny Boyle.
I think everyone on planet Earth unanimously agrees about this movie. I'm sure there's like an alternate universe where it's like a 95% on Rotten Tomatoes masterpiece. It's very much just another romantic comedy disguising itself with a really, truly intriguing concept, but it really just doesn't play into it all that much. That's not to say there aren't interesting moments, such as the Oasis, the Coca-Cola, all that stuff is actually really cool. The little slow-motion black space thing that happens when he gets hit by a bus. Acting is all great. Beatles kind of just get sucked off for 2.5 hours. John Lennon's scene was pretty cool. I will give it that. This movie is filled with a handful of interesting scenes, like kind of nightmarish scenes, very funny scenes, kind of charming scenes, but endlessly predictable. Again, doesn't fully capitalize on its truly kind of surreal, very interesting premise. Probably never going to watch it again, but I would probably give it a watch on Valentine's Day if I'm not single next year, like I have been for the last 20 years or so. I gave Yesterday a 5 out of 10.
Number 64 is The Rise of Skywalker, which was directed by J.J. Abrams. The one word I use to describe this movie is Standwalker, because it is very much just a movie just standing in a saga about Skywalkers, even though it's trying to be like the big cap-off. Talked about it before, probably never going to watch it again, 5 out of 10.
Also worth noting, while I gave it a bit of credit in my review, the facial de-aging of Carrie Fisher, as limited as it was genuinely terrible.
Number 63 is Longshot, which was directed by Jonathan Levine.
The one word I use to describe this movie is Rogan, because it is very much a Seth Rogen movie. Charlize Theron and Seth Rogen do have some chemistry and work very well together as individuals. Everyone else is pretty funny or just kind of fine. Andy Serkis was great, although Maggie genuinely pissed me off throughout. It's very typical of a romantic comedy with some added Seth Rogen inappropriate humor charm, but nothing ever really impressed me about the movie. It was very by the books, and some moments genuinely bored me, and some of the humor just didn't get anything out of me. It was when the film was a bit more far-fetched, such as negotiating a hostage exchange while on molly pills and infiltrating neo-Nazis before comically diving out a window and smashing into a car, that it became truly hilarious. On a technical level, it's kind of flat, although there was some nice use of lighting and the film had good morals and a pretty funny, nice ending. Of course, it's ever so slightly predictable, but there were one or two callback jokes and sharp political mockery I enjoyed, and they did put the occasional unique spin on some of the tropes. I don't have that much to really say, and I'll probably never watch it again, but I did not hate it, and I consider that a success. If anything, I felt like a decent human while watching it, which is a very nice feeling. Ice Cube's son be a Republican Christian and Black Panther reference, though. I gave Longshot a 5 out of 10. It's closer to a 6 than a 4.
Number 62 is Villains, which was directed by Dan Burke and Robert Olson.
It's just another one of those movies, I guess. The one word I would use to describe this movie is Skarsgård, because I couldn't help but just focus on him throughout the entire runtime. It's fun to see him have some fun outside of his role as Pennywise, and I also realized he kind of looks a little bit like Steve Buscemi, which is pretty funny. Macon Monroe is pretty good. Kyra Sedgwick does a good job as the psycho wife who has just lost her grip on reality. Jeffrey Donovan does a good job switching between kind-hearted husband to genuine psychopath. The characters were relatively entertaining. There are plenty of kind of stressful and funny moments. The film offered some interesting shots, creepy themes, and had a kind of goofy tone that switched nicely between that and a sort of horror thriller vibe. There are some genuinely entertaining moments, and it wasn't a terrible experience. I appreciate the emotional touch the ending takes a stab at, and it works decently. There are plenty of weird moments that had me chuckling, such as the scene where they get drugged and then double up by snorting a different drug. The opening voiceover is also pretty effective and reminiscent of Pulp Fiction. Overall, I did not regret watching it, but that is most definitely not to say that this movie is particularly good. The score is fine. The acting, while mostly good, has moments where it dips down and isn't very good. This movie is littered with some genuinely annoying moments and awful character decisions. Sometimes I found myself rooting for no one and being perfectly fine with all of them just getting obliterated by a fucking nuke. Like during the opening scene, why didn't you just grab some random thing on the counter to open the register or crowbar it open? Why did you have to get that specific candy bar for that terrible joke? Why was that little girl so fucking dumb? Why didn't they just pretend to leave without calling the police, then call in anonymously that the little girl was locked in the basement and get away with robbing the couple while saving the little girl while they're all the way in Florida long gone? Maybe you shouldn't have told them your fucking names. They are fucking psychopaths who chain little girls in the basement, you know. This whole scenario could have been avoided with this simple thought process and no tragedy would have taken place. Also, during that emotional escape, why didn't he also duck down and not let himself die? I'm sure you all could have lived. How did the pills strong enough to put a bull to sleep not fucking kill them or leave them unconscious for much longer? While the cinematography was mostly pretty good, it was kind of lifeless most of the time, and there was one shot of a tow truck that looked pretty bad. I do hate to take away from the 80s happy sunshine tone the ending has, but I'm pretty sure this little girl is going to be scarred beyond playing on the beach after being kidnapped, chained up, and shooting a guy in the fucking head. Entertaining, but not really all that logical when the film takes on a tone suggesting it should be taken very seriously. I know I said the tone was pretty goofy earlier, but there are those serious moments I can't help but mention. Check it out if you want. It's not awful, but it isn't all that recommendable either. I'm giving this one a 5 out of 10.
Number 61 is Toy Story 4, which was directed by Josh Cooley.
I'll probably do some kind of epic Toy Story saga review in the future where I talk about all 4 movies. The one that I use to describe Toy Story 4 is just alright, because it is very much just alright. Like, it's nothing great or anything. I think I gave it a 5 out of 10. I would probably recommend it to like a hardcore Toy Story fan, but I am a hardcore Toy Story fan and I just didn't really enjoy it, so I don't know. Maybe you'll get more out of it than I did. Number 60 is Missing Link, which was directed by Chris Butler. The one word I use to describe Missing Link is simply visual. Missing Link boasts beautifully animated sequences, great shots, pretty much great character designs, some genuinely good voice acting that matches the character, some fun moments, and of course the occasional kid-friendly laugh that's backed up by some genuinely clever and funny visual gags. That's about everything I have to say positively. It's very one note, by the books, and just not really memorable beyond its technical achievements, with writing that doesn't suppress anything beyond very average, almost to the point of being boring, with very one note characters that don't have that much charm overall. I even found myself questioning the main character quite a lot, which is not a good thing, especially when he just barely learns something in quite a formulaic way. I don't hate this movie, but I won't revisit anytime soon, nor will I probably remember that much from it, but at least I have something to talk about, even if it isn't that much, which is better than absolutely nothing. I thought it was better than Toy Story simply because it was more original, I guess, and it is more beautiful. Stop motion will always be more inherently charming to me than any CG film. I gave Missing Link a 5 out of 10. Number 59 is Dr. Sleep, which was directed by Mike Flanagan. Over time, I've grown far less fond of Dr. Sleep. At first, I thought that it was kind of decent, but now I've just kind of gone to thinking that it's just fine. I still do like a lot of things about it. Ewan McGregor, the girl, the little bandit group of weird, crack-headed soul suckers. A lot of people find that kind of stuff goofy. I liked it. I thought it was genuinely kind of creepy. I do like the hotel sequence. I find it enjoyable. Jump scares, not so much. Rose the Hat, no. I think what made me change my mind the most is that a lot of it just isn't really that good overall. Like, it's mostly just fine. In fact, the one word I use to describe it is lacking. The cinematography, like I said, is very creative. The editing is cool. There are some really fun moments. There are some disturbing moments, gory moments, but it's just not really something that I fancy acknowledging anymore. Like, I'm willing to just forget about it completely. Mike Flanagan is a talented guy, and I'm excited to see what he does next, but this really just did not hit the baseball bat. I've taken my rating down from a 6 to a 5 out of 10. Number 58 is The Angry Birds Movie 2, which was directed by Thurop van Orman. Y'all already know I'm a big fan of this movie. No need to talk about it anymore. Let's just forget that ever happened. I think the one word I use to describe it is just sequel, because that really is just what it is at its core. Number 57 is Zombieland Double Tap, which was directed by Ruben Fleischer. As with the new Jay and Silent Bob movie, I'd recommend avoiding Zombieland Double Tap if you have no point of reference to the original. It was a whole bunch of newly written, kinda quirky laughs for a fan of the original and maybe cinema goers in general, and there are some callback/reused jokes that work in the movie's favour, but then there are others that feel a bit more pandering to said original crowd and some jokes that just don't really work at all. I thought Madison was kind of irritating, and I saw that nut allergy reveal coming a mile away. There's a lot of truly terrible CGI that makes some of the more violent scenes and wide shots feel more like a video game than a feature-length film. Rosario Dawson was actually a really nice inclusion, but this movie shares that same issue I have the original, where I just don't fucking get what Wichita and Little Rock's fucking problem is. I would have been very happy if they just fell off the edge during that last epic sequence where Tallahassee might have died, but he didn't, and they ride off into the sunset, which was equally nice, I guess. The inclusion of Albuquerque and Flagstaff was just weird, but it led to a half-decent one-shot battle sequence that was funny and action-packed enough, but suffered from some previously mentioned truly terrible CGI. Also worth mentioning that while Madison was irritating, I did kind of warm up to her in some scenes, but she just was not bitten, and it was so obvious. The raw visual gags were still prominent and were funny enough, although they felt slightly forced sometimes. I could talk about the Bill Murray cameo for 10 minutes, but I'll boil it down to it starting off funny, having a decent zombie exposure origin, and ending on a slightly forced one-liner, followed by an equally forced one-liner, the first being a Ghostbusters reference and the second being a Garfield reference, with the joke about Garfield 3 being Bill Murray's last film before the apocalypse already having been hammered in plenty. He was pretty badass though. It's also a minor problem, but why did Columbus notice the creepy resemblance between Tallahassee and Albuquerque, but not between himself and Flagstaff? Like, it's just not funny. Still, I can tell everyone had a lot of fun making this, and I basically got what I sat down for in terms of exactly what I was expecting, but it really isn't anything remotely special, with or without reference to the original. It's a silly comedy with a little less heart than the first entry, but I probably sit through both of them in a sort of first of all, then sequel sitting, if you catch my drift. Tallahassee will always be be my emission god and Columbus my bitchy little buddy. So, from Zombieland screening, good night, or hasta la vista, baby, as this zombie loved referencing for some reason. It's because of all these Terminator jokes that genuinely the only word I could think to describe this movie is Terminator. Terminator 2 is the second best film ever made. I hope you all love Fantasia as much as I do, and pay loads of money for a 10 years later sequel that seems to be what's popular right now.
Number 56 is Ready or Not, which was directed by Matt Bettinelli-Olpin and Tyler Gillette.
I have spoken of this movie before. It is, admittedly, it's a lot of fun. You know, I will watch it again eventually, one of these days. I'll introduce someone to it. One thing I have regretted ever since I made my video on it is I never mentioned the awful soundtrack, which genuinely ruined a lot of scenes. It was like a fucking Hans Zimmer action movie, but like B-Tech. Still a 5 out of 10. It holds up well in memory. Maybe, who knows, I'll change it to a 6 down the line. You never know these things. The one word I use to describe it is literally polarizing. It was probably the most down the middle movie I saw all of 2019, and that is fascinating.
Number 55 is The Day Shall Come, which was directed by Christopher Morris.
This film boasts some genuinely effective satire and offers some interesting racial, religious, and moral questions to ask, especially towards the conclusion, with the people who arguably do or don't deserve to win winning, and the guys who arguably do or don't deserve to lose losing due to their own lack of care and high ambition. I will admit it had me chuckling many times, especially as it gradually became more absurd, quirky, and awkward. The performances were all pretty good, and while never bad, they felt oddly mismatched to the humour sometimes. I found out halfway through the film from some research this was in fact a British, American, Australian production, and then I clicked and I was like, yep, this is a very Brit awkward humour, which genuinely felt kind of weird coming from the American actors. Some jokes just weren't very funny and it made the film feel kind of stilted and awkward. It was very oddly flat and just not very well filmed at all. There were a few interesting shots, but the continuity was so bad at points it was just kind of annoying. Overall, I think I had a good time, although I don't really know. It's very short, and like I said, it boasts some interesting themes and effective comedy, but it's nothing I'd watch again anytime soon, simply because I wasn't very impressed or particularly invested. I did actually like the characters quite a lot, and the humour that comes with them, although the paedophile thing felt kind of pointless and just silly. Actually, now that I take a moment to think about it, the whole paedophile angle actually kind of works for the character that it revolves around, because the FBI, like, have him spy on the main character and his family and shit, and I guess it makes sense because they have charges against him. Yeah, I'm an idiot for not paying attention, I know. I'm now only just realizing this. Here is an extra point for the movie. My favourite moment was easily the last 10 minutes or so, which was just so charming and offered the most to say with the film's message about both equally foolish sides of the situations. I wouldn't say I recommend it as an instant watch, but if you're in the mood for something ticklish and have literally nothing else to watch, then I say go ahead. I gave The Day Shall Come a 6 out of 10. I know I sounded quite negative, but it is actually very interesting. Check it out if you like.
Number 54 is The Personal History of David Copperfield, which was directed by Armando Iannucci. I enjoyed quite a few things about this movie, including the cinematography, which was genuinely really good, the costumes, the set design and locations, and some of the performances. Tilda Swinton is always fun no matter what, Dev Patel is pretty energetic and brings a lot to the role, Peter Capaldi was a lot of fun, Gwendolyn Christie was entertaining, and Morfydd Clark was actually kind of funny and charming. Other than that, everyone was just really fine, and the kid actor flip-flopped between good and bad. None of the characters were particularly interesting beyond some of the main characters. The story was pretty tame and basic. It was kind of weird to see everyone have perfect teeth despite it being a very grim time lacking any toothpaste or serious dental care. Some elements of the story were pretty stupid and either didn't make sense or just weren't very entertaining. It had a weirdness and kind of eccentric style to it, which I kind of appreciated. Most of the attempts at humour failed beyond belief, while others worked much better. I was never deeply invested in the film, nor was I ever particularly impressed by it. The first 10 minutes and plenty of moments onward were very entertaining, but other moments were just uninteresting. I found myself getting slightly confused as it delved deeper into the storytelling aspect of Copperfield's life, but I'm willing to admit I just probably didn't get it. There were plenty of scenes in this film that were really entertaining and clever little moments here and there, but the rest of the film was just really uninspired. The bottle factory scene was really corny for sure. They did this weird blur effect during some scenes, although I'm not sure if it was the movie or the View cinema projector experience, so I won't use this as a point of criticism just yet.
although I will probably not be going back to see it anytime soon. Still worth paying £6 instead of £15 at the Everyman, because the film definitely was not worth the fancy-pantsy cinema experience. I was never completely uninvested, but I wasn't particularly invested at the same time, if that makes sense. I was entertained, and I think that's all the movie really has to offer, being somewhat solid entertainment if you're bored. The whole random races just mixing in was kind of surreal and a nice touch to the story. Some characters actually really annoyed me, and I found it very weird how Copperfield aged like 15 years, but literally no one else did. There is literally no other surreal aspect to the story other than the races, and maybe some of the metaphorical story writing elements to it, but that just didn't make sense to me. It never felt like a story that needed to be told, and I wasn't surprised that the original book had a more interesting story and drama, and a dozen movies existed before this one. It's definitely a why not movie and nothing more, so I guess I can't be too harsh or too light on it. Check it out if it kind of interests you, but if you don't think so even for a minute, then just don't. Also, occasional bad editing and continuity errors. The one word I use to describe this movie is copper, because it is very much just copper, you know, when comparing it to like silver and gold and diamond. I gave the personal history of David Copperfield a 6 out of 10. It might be closer to a 5, I'm not sure. It's definitely not a 7. Number 53 is Terminator Dark Fate, which was directed by Tim Miller. One word I use to describe it is Carl, because, you know, I have a great sense of humour. Spoken of this not solid but fairly entertaining 6 out of 10 movie before. Moving on. Number 52 is The Informer, which was directed by Andrea Di Stefano. This was a very weird little movie that me and my mum saw together on kind of last notice. We missed the first 2 minutes or something. It has a very promising kind of strong setup. There's some great acting. There's some overacting from Clive Owen. It's just kind of disposable. I'm never going to watch it again. It's not going to change anyone's lives, but it was relatively well made. The story was kind of interesting, and how just constantly screwed over he gets. Common was in the movie, and he was a lot of fun. There was some humour with his character, actually, which kind of helped with the constantly serious tone, maybe lighten the film up a little bit. I can't really remember that much from it. I remember the ending was kind of down note and just not very nice, which I kind of appreciate. And there just isn't really a lot to say about it, because it's not like a bad film. A decent flick that you could probably see late on a Saturday night with nothing that much else to do. The one word I would probably use to describe it is dunno. I'm genuinely not very sure. I think I gave it a 6 out of 10. Number 51 is The Death of Dick Long, which was directed by Daniel Scheinert, I think it's pronounced. A24 is known for its extremely weird, kind of edgy movies under its wing. This is no exception to their philosophy. I do have mixed feelings about it, although for the most part I think I enjoyed it pretty well, although it's probably something I'd enjoy and appreciate a lot more on a second viewing. I often thought this movie worked a lot better as a drama than it did a comedy. The title alone is pretty funny and actually ties in very nicely to the eventual reveal of Richard Long's horrific demise. The acting was mostly great, with Andre Hyland as Earl and Michael Abbott Jr. as Zeke being my two favourites. Earl had these little mannerisms, kind of ironic sense of humour, and a specific way of talking that always came across as really charming. Zeke was just kind of epic. No words to be said. Virginia Newcomb as Lydia was also really good. Sarah Baker was appropriately kind of goofy, and Officer Dudley was a likeable and goofy character. The little girl was decent. Jane Long served her purpose. Dr. Richer was kind of funny. Sheriff Spencer was a funny character. Having the director himself play Dick was a very Alfred Hitchcock level of speciality upon learning that. Some of the jokes in this movie really hit me, especially the slow but gradual and fucking hilarious reveal about Dick's death at the hands of an oversized horse penis, which is a worryingly real thing this film is cleverly captivating and poking fun at for how dark and kind of comedic it is depending on how you look at it. Watching Zeke punch that window and get bandaged, freak out during the interrogation, and run away from the police just to get rid of a horse he loves were all very funny moments. There are some jokes I didn't laugh at, but I still got them and appreciate the humour. Some scenes were visually very funny, the dialogue was pretty great and felt like just normal words people would have in these situations when trying to be as normal as possible. Earl and Zeke had a pretty fun dynamic that carried along very nicely all the way until the end. There were a bunch of jokes that just didn't hit me at all. The film lacked in personality and felt kind of gloomy all the way throughout. While I personally didn't enjoy it, I can understand how it ties into the kind of dark undertones of the story. The cinematography was decent with some interesting handheld shots here and there though. The opening sequence alone, with its use of pre-existing music, no dialogue, chaotic lad events, font choice, title, and ambiguity of what happened is fucking awesome on its own, especially with the band practice aspect included. The use of music overall was good, although the score kinda sucked. I do have a few other issues with this movie. The rest of the opening sequence is filmed like some kind of lame indie film, with the worst shot being when Zeke is in the shower. Some of the film was just kind of dull on a visual level. It didn't have much of a visual flair. I don't regret watching it, and I'll be watching it again to be a bit more conclusive about how I really feel about it. I'd recommend people check it out because movies like this don't get noticed too often. I'm gonna give The Death of Dick Long a 6 out of 10. The one word I use to describe it is just weird. It is fucking weird, but it is worth it.
Number 50 is Little Women, which was directed by Greta Gerwig.
I do have more to say of Little Women in the future. Decent little movie, very sincere, very fun, very well acted, very well shot. I fucking love the Book Factory moment at the end. Seriously, I love that so much. I gave it a 6 out of 10. Not really my kind of film, but still entertaining nonetheless. The one word I use to describe it is very ladylike, which is not a bad thing. It is very ladylike in a very charming way.
Number 49 is The Wave, which was directed by Gil Claben.
The one word I use to describe The Wave is waving, literally unidentified substance, the movie. My main question is whether or not it does the visual representation of hallucinogenics well or not. I'd say, based on research, that it plays on that time perception, use of colours, lack of memory, and pretty much everything else pretty well. And it even goes an extra mile and adds a slightly surreal tone where our protagonist can actually alter events and set up the future events with an interesting payoff that results in his death, but with the relief that he saw the world in a way he never had before, did the right thing for a family in need, and framed his boss, who was a man on top, enough to get his scumbag ass sent to jail, while almost getting himself and others killed and losing his money and original life in the process. The film actually executes all these events in ways that I enjoyed. There's even a single take about rushing for work and getting accused of cheating in there that was pretty good and had an interesting transition to do with the tripping Frank. Yes, a lawyer named Frank who wears a suit and a best friend called Jim. How original. Justin Long is always fun to watch, and all the other performances are actually really good. Some of the characters, particularly Frank and Jim, are actually pretty unlikable, and Frank has little motivation to do what he does beyond his wife being a bitch and these people snogging in a car. He's also a dumbass who does things he criticizes other people for and can't stand up for himself. Jim is just kind of an asshole, but to the film's credit, they do somewhat progress as characters, and there are some interesting moments where they're motivated by hints that the universe gives them. I kind of found it difficult to really connect with anyone. Sure, I felt bad for them every now and then, but I was never all that invested beyond the actual journey they were on. Some of the music was pretty annoying, but sometimes it actually worked decently. The cinematography ranged from interesting to flat shot, reverse shot. Some of the humor was just unfunny, but I got the occasional chuckle here and there. There are some genuinely colourful and visually pleasant moments, and some oddly great transitions considering the presumably medium to low budget. Overall, I enjoyed this movie. It's not a great movie, it's not a bad movie, it is a good thing to sit down and watch. I'd recommend a use of drugs to heighten the experience and feel what the main character is feeling, as well as watching it late at night, or maybe try both. Happy Administrative Professionals Day. 6 out of 10.
Number 48 is Beanpole, which was directed by Kantemir Balagov.
Very interesting film, also very frustrating film, where the one word I use to describe it is literally the title, Beanpole. There is a lot to say about it. I will save it for another video, another day. It does deserve its own focus. I will give it that. I rated it a 6 out of 10, and even though it is slightly higher up on the 6 out of 10 scale, it's probably closer to a 5. I really have no fucking idea.
Number 47 is The Dead Don't Die, which was directed by Jim Jarmusch.
The one word I used to describe this movie is just odd. I guess the biggest issue with this movie is that it just doesn't really know what it's trying to be. Sometimes it is actually quite clever and funny, and other times it's just like, what? Why? No, thank you. It has a genuinely good cast, and their talents do shine through this kind of deadpan delivery they have to do. I've never actually seen any other movies by Jim Jarmusch, and I guess this was kind of a decent introduction to his work. It's very much his signature style from what I've read about him. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think people often believe that this is his least quality film. There are a whole bunch of plot points that just don't really go anywhere. There's a bunch of pointless characters just kind of thrown in. There's some pointless pointless things that are set up and never even fucking happen. The zombies themselves are actually pretty cool, and the movie can actually be kind of awesome when it comes to the violence. It has a completely bizarre, kind of random, surreal tone throughout the entire movie. I love the cheeky little fourth wall breaks that actually pop up every now and then. I thought the ending was kind of satisfying, but like I said, it left a lot to be desired at the same time. I will admit that the trailer definitely advertised the movie as though it was funnier than it actually is, and made it seem a bit more exciting. It is very much a mixed bag, but I actually had a genuinely good time watching it. I was not disappointed to have left my curry early to make the movie, or else I probably would have missed it, and I would have been very disappointed. It's definitely not a film for everybody, but I'd say still check it out, just in case you're curious about it. And I'm giving this one a 6 out of 10.
Number 46 is Jay and Silent Bob Reboot, which was directed by Kevin Smith.
The one word I would use to describe this movie is nostalgia, because as a fan of these characters and this particular cinematic universe, I am very nostalgic for it, and I do have a lot more to say about this movie. I gave it a 6 out of 10, more to come on that.
Number 45 is Avengers Endgame, which was directed by Anthony Russo and Joe Russo.
The one word I would use to describe Avengers Endgame is just disappointing, because I really enjoyed Infinity War. I love that movie, but this one just really failed to impress me. I don't really like or care for Ant-Man, and he didn't really have that much of a presence in the movie. He was just kind of there to be joked around, I guess. I think Captain Marvel is genuinely just a bad character, and she has no justified presence in this universe. She takes the film down for me. I also find it kind of lacks a lot of tension. Infinity War is full of tension and dark moments, and it takes itself very seriously, and it comes across very effectively. This movie has like this ridiculous kind of Marvel humor just shoved into this admittedly quite serious plot and these really goofy moments, and I just don't feel like it matches. Sometimes it actually works really well, but sometimes it's just like, tone it down a bit. And also, I know all these characters are just going to come back to life, you know? Just because Black Widow died in this movie doesn't mean that there's no possibility whatsoever she won't get a movie just like set before. Like, I know this isn't going to be the last time I'm going to see these characters, because they are just way too profitable. We're going to see more of Vision, and we're going to see more of all these other silly characters. I also genuinely have no idea how Guardians of the Galaxy 3 is supposed to pick up from this thing they've done with Gamora. Like, it doesn't make sense to me. Thanos is still good. Nebula is a genuinely good character. There's a bunch of stupid shit in here, like Nebula just, like, not teleporting then and there when her head started hurting and shit. Could have prevented everything bad from happening. God damn it. Action is great. Acting is amazing. There are some genuinely touching moments. I do feel like the last fight scene maybe goes on for a bit too long, and Captain Marvel can just fly away with the fucking glove if she's that oh-fucking-P. But at the end of the day, it is entertaining. That is what this whole franchise has been leading up to. Iron Man's death was genuinely touching. Little kid actor can't cry for shit. Captain America stuff was just stupid. It still has that charm of a big blockbuster movie. I will give it that. But it also has the big faults that come with it. I gave Avengers Endgame a 6 out of 10. Very entertaining, still very disappointing at the same time. What more can I really say?
Ant-Man, Thanos, ass. It sounds stupid, I know, but it's realistic, okay? Number 44 is Spider-Man, Far From Home, which was directed by John Watts.
The one word I use to describe this movie is webbish. I think way too much CGI for one makes the movie feel fake. Some of the humour feels really forced. Some of it is actually really funny. Tom Holland, Jake Gyllenhaal, Samuel Jackson, Jacob Batalon, Zendaya, all amazing. Loved all of them. All the acting was great. I do firmly believe that this was a semi-interesting way to step forward in the MCU. The post-credit scene is actually brilliant. J.K. Simmons, man. My main issue with these movies as, like, Spider-Man universe things is that Flash is just not Flash. He's more just, like, Peter's mate who just kind of bullies him every now and then as a joke. Flash is, like, a jock character. I don't understand why they couldn't have just made, like, a new interpretation, like MJ, you know? It kind of would have made more sense if they just did that. I love the take on Mysterio. It's fresh, it's fun, it's unique. The drone fights are kind of boring. Obviously, the Spider-Man web slinging is very fun to watch. Him just going around fighting, being Spider-Man. He is my favorite superhero, and I really appreciate what they did with him. The locations they go to, obviously it being a Far From Home movie, are genuinely beautiful. There are some genuinely clever moments, and I do like the twist. I was not familiar with the Mysterio character before watching this movie. Full of fun and entertaining moments, full of equally disappointing moments. I feel like the whole happy Aunt May thing was just kind of stupid. Just why? It is a decent movie, not my favorite Spider-Man movie, way better than shit like The Amazing Spider-Man 2. I'm gonna give Far From Home a 6 out of 10. I really have high hopes for Spider-Man 3, I really do.
Number 43 is In the Tall Grass, which was directed by Vincenzo Natali.
So the director of the original Cube brings us another work of art? Well, I don't really know, to be honest. In fact, the one word I use to describe it is just strange. This is a visual treat, to say the least. For a film set entirely in a grass field, it matched the rather mysterious tone this film was trying to present, although it was a little bit inconsistent, as there were times where it felt like it was going for a more creepy vibe. The cinematography was honestly pretty brilliant, and there were a whole bunch of interesting shots and visuals that played in nicely to the film's plot. There was some pretty awesome but minimally used creature design for these grass humanoids and underground victims of the field. The symbolism of the giant rock was kind of interesting, and the things it does to you based on your personality I thought was quite interesting. The film's score was pretty great and consistently eerie. The acting in this movie was pretty great. Everyone was fairly dedicated to their roles, although the kid actor wasn't very good in some scenes. I actually found myself both horrifically hating and also kind of liking the Tobin character, but by the end I kind of completely warmed up to him. There were some extremely bizarre, trippy images I genuinely loved for how strange they were. The film's twisted story was interesting, and it took some nice directions that added to the experience. There were some pretty cool setups of interesting and sometimes underwhelming payoffs. There were some really dumb and beyond irritating decisions made by the characters that had me shouting out loud while alone in my freezing cold bedroom. There were some slightly stupid moments that weren't as irritating but still noticeable. The dialogue could be really bad at times, but there were enough moments where it worked well for what it was, but the only memorable lines were the ones I hated. Anyone who's seen the film will know about the obnoxious buying your lady a martini rhyme and that equally annoying one I've already forgotten. There were some homages to Cube I noticed. I thought the dad character, who turned out to be a psycho-religious man, was similar to Quentin in a few ways. There was a set piece that looked similar to the Cube interior, and the final shot of the time-looped grok-crazy Travis lying dead in the mud was similar to the final shot of Worth dying in Cube. They were very fun for me, as I'm a fan of this director's work, and his direction is often the best part of his movies. I thought the time-looping aspect was interesting and developed well enough. One of the major issues about the grass setting is the constant characters screaming out towards each other. I never want to hear the name Travis or Tobin or Becky or Cal ever again. There was a jump scare at one point and then just never again, which was kind of weird. It's more of a one-time experience that isn't really worth jumping back to revisit. I could imagine watching this in the background or with another first-time viewer, and I would recommend it on a slow afternoon. It's one of the better Stephen King movies in recent years, but don't expect anything all that special. I mean, it's Netflix. Duh. I still really enjoyed it on my first watch, and I'm giving it a 6 out of 10.
Number 42 is It Chapter 2, which was directed by Andy Meschietti.
First movie I ever reviewed on this channel. Opinions haven't changed on it, although I will admit that some of the more scary scenes, upon looking back over them, are kind of goofy, particularly the old lady with the titty scene. I do still firmly hold the belief that it is a 6 out of 10 movie. I enjoy it. I will probably watch both It movies again in the future. One word I would use to describe it is crunny, which is a mix between creepy and funny. So there you go.
Number 41 is Dolemite Is My Name, which was directed by Craig Brewer.
I like this movie. Sure, it doesn't take any huge risks or really capture much of the tensity that the real-life situation definitely would have had, but in a strange way, that kind of works in its favour while also being slightly underwhelming. Eddie Murphy and pretty much everyone else involved gives such a great performance and gets their characters and motivations communicated clearly, and there are a handful of slightly touching and very funny moments, especially with the problem-solving, positive outlook the character of Rudy Ray Moore has throughout. I was rolling with this film from the opening bit with Snoop Dogg, but it wasn't until about about an hour in I really started enjoying myself. But it wasn't until about an hour in I really started enjoying myself and the story behind this admittedly interesting person, and there's a lot to learn about him. I kind of wish the film was longer so we could explore the more interesting aspects of his life, but at the end of the day I think it was just trying to be a bit more about what he did and less about who he was, but it does manage to peer into his mind and relationships a decent amount when necessary. The film is very predictable, but there was an occasional moment where I was like, shit, I guess one or two things could actually go down differently, but it always surprises you with a more positive outlook. The soundtrack was very smooth and fit the time very well, although what I found most disappointing was on a technical level, the film never really captured that 70s vibe, which is especially jarring when we get shown clips from the actual Dolemite movie. Overall, the film just wasn't much to look at. The shots were simple, the editing was fine, and the sound design was alright. There were some genuinely fun sequences, and I thought a lot of the one-liners were pretty enjoyable, especially the repeated use of fucking up motherfuckers. There was a certain uplift I felt towards the end, but never throughout, which made me kind of glad that I sat through it all the way for that feeling. Overall, the ending felt nicely complete, and it's nice to see Eddie Murphy doing something passable with his career for the first time in what feels like literally forever. Here's to a fresh start, Eddie, and I'm giving this one a 6 out of 10. It might be closer to a 7 than a 5.
Number 40 is the Lego Movie, the second part, which was directed by Mike Mitchell.
The one word I use to describe this movie is repeat, because it does in many ways just repeat a lot of elements from the first movie. Even with a truly epic title, the Lego Movie 2 doesn't hold the smallest of a candle to the original Lego Movie. In fact, I think I slightly prefer the Lego Batman movie. When I say slightly, I mean I really prefer it. There is a decent amount I do like about it, so I guess I'll start with the problems I have. The main problem is that all the supporting characters from the original film just do nothing. Their role is literally just to confuse the audience about the true intentions of the villains. They don't do anything. Some of the jokes and repetitive gags about overused pop songs just weren't funny. The songs weren't even that bad and kind of catchy and enjoyable. It was just the constant use that became irritating. The live action sequences were terribly edited. The on-the-nose humor worked for the animation, but for live action it was just fucking annoying, especially with the mum character. The story was pretty basic and didn't really take any interesting directions or special ideas into play. On a more positive note, I genuinely wasn't expecting the twist to do with Emmett's future self, but the twist about the Queen and her people, as much as it caught me off guard, wasn't something that made all that much sense to me. They seemed genuinely evil and manipulative, so it just didn't work. It even succumbs to reference humor. Teeth gritting emoji. I won't even bother talking about how Lord Business's character from the first film is kind of betrayed with his little screen time, or the inconsistent real-life logic that kind of removes any value it had from the first film, so I'll get onto the positives, I guess. Every single aspect of the animation I genuinely loved. The character design, the countless chuckle-worthy visual gags, very impressively designed locations, objects and genuinely awesome stuff in general, the stop-motion inspired Lego style. The film doubled its visual cleverness in the 5 years it took to be unnecessarily released. Not to mention the consistently very pleasant use of colour and some setups here and there that tied into some fun moments of the film. Emmett was still a likeable and charming character. Wildstyle was pretty awesome. Batman epic though. The Batman references were kind of cool as a Batman fan. The Justice League jabs were pretty funny. The one genuinely good use of a song was cool, that being when Emmett and Rex find that creepy Playmobil village. It was so weird and creepy. It honestly felt like I was watching a really dodgy animated David Lynch movie. It was so fucking insane and entertaining. There was an especially neat visual gag where every time they built something it would have those number codes on Lego manual instructions, which was kind of cool. Although in context it kind of takes the point away from the think freely narrative of the first film. I know they're still building freely, but it still felt kind of weird thinking about it. For some reason the action sequences were genuinely really epic. This easily beats Endgame in terms of hyped up action sequences in this LCU. They actually did what Marvel did in like 33 movies and only 4. It was quite beautiful. The film had a very genuine feel and moral to its story. The Everything is Awesome remix was slightly epic, although it more perfectly borders the line between annoying running gag and genuinely entertaining. It had a nice message about just sticking together and keeping everything awesome, which is nice and all, but it does play it a bit too safe, especially compared to the original film. They kind of rehashed the idea about liking yourself for who you are, but it felt kind of fresh. Seeing Emmett progress to the point he did and even develop a tougher side was kind of nice to see, and Wild Style actually mellowing out properly was touching. That hair though. Overall, not a bad film by any means, but it is a whole 1.5 stars down from the last one simply because it's just not as special. It's by no means forgettable, but it's nothing to really behold like one would a fine wine. I almost recommend it, just for a bit of a longer day of relaxation, so go ahead by all means. And I'm giving this one a 6 out of 10.
Number 39 is Honey Boy, which was directed by Alma Har'el.
Bro. The one word I used to describe this movie is sad. It's very sad, upsetting. Shia LaBeouf's semi-biographical movie. He plays the role fantastically. Lucas Hedges is pretty well cast in his place. There's some interesting moments that are obviously meant to represent real moments in his life. The score is fine. Camera work is decent. The editing can be a little bit choppy here and there. It feels like the movie just didn't really know how to end. It's like, okay, well, we gotta end now. There's plenty of emotional moments. There's plenty of genuine moments. Some good metaphorical moments. Some entertaining moments. Very funny moments, actually. Very surprising moments. And overall, I thought it was very good. 6 out of 10.
Number 38 is Hail Satan, which was directed by Penny Lane.
Very interesting little documentary. Learned some fun facts about Satanism. Did some reading afterwards. Could maybe have explored it a little bit more in depth. It's very much like a modern telling of modern stuff. I was expecting it to be a bit more deeper into it, I guess. Very flat on a technical level, which is a problem that a lot of documentaries suffer from, but still very enjoyable. The one word I use to describe it is yes. 7 out of 10.
Number 37 is Booksmart, which was directed by Olivia Wilde.
Booksmart was a very interesting film because I had a very fun time while watching it, although there were definitely a few things about it that I just did not like at all. I thought it was a very, very funny film. The kind of cringy, getting straight A's, giving 0 F's tagline didn't put me off the film. I appreciated it. I knew this was going to be like one of those kind of quirky comedies. It's basically a female Superbad, and Superbad is one of my favourite comedies, at least. I love it. And I didn't even realise that that was something I wanted to see, because I love Superbad, and this kind of reimagining of it in a way is genuine and it feels nice. I didn't think the movie was anything all that special on a technical level. There are some moments that just really had me rolling my eyes that I just kind of took me out of the experience just a tiny bit, but the film does kind of make up for them. I didn't really like the ending. There's some forced conflict. It's a bit of a slow building film, but that is what I like about it. It does slowly build towards that eventual kind of chaotic, just wild, mental, sort of crass humour. I thought the main leads were amazing. There are these scenes where they're like very clearly improvising and it's all very natural. It flows nicely. It moves the film along in a comedic, very genuine way. Billy Lord, I thought, was an extremely just amazing inclusion. Maya Rudolph is in the movie for a little bit and she's actually pretty good. All the supporting characters are interesting in their own ways, some of them less than others. And all in all, I thought it was a good movie. I think the one word I would use to describe it is easily funny, because it is just a funny film that I enjoyed. I might revisit some other time. I thought it was maybe worth a rewatch or two. Maybe not in the future, like the near future, but at some point I will happily sit through it again. And knowing what is going to happen might actually somewhat heighten the experience for me, because this is one of those movies where I think knowing what's going to happen might actually make it a little bit better, although I would say some jokes deserve to be experienced. I gave it a 7 out of 10.
Number 36 is The Farewell, which was directed by Lulu Wang.
This was a very sweet watch, I will say. The one word I used to describe it is friendly. I felt a very friendly kind of warmth while watching it. The film has a very interesting story with themes of responsibility, cultural differences, and what's best for individuals we might lose soon. You know, are they just a person, or are they just part of a whole and need to be decided for? The film does have a lot to say. It never really takes off the ground and becomes truly interesting for me personally, but they do a great job at making the Nai character, who is dying of lung cancer, very likeable, charming, and endearing. I got the impression all these family members cared about each other, although I feel as though the film often struggled to really flesh out and make us really care about them, but at least I understood what they were about. While the acting was nothing exceptional, it was pretty good all the way throughout, particularly from the actors playing Billy and Nai.
CGI, and they delivered the emotions in a clear and concise way. The cinematography in this film is honestly really impressive. There were tons of interesting wide shots that brought a lot of scenes that otherwise could have been presented in really boring ways interesting. There were a bunch of moving shots that looked really nice. Every time this film gave me a new scene to look at, the camera work really stood out and impressed me. The score was very fun to listen to and used appropriately throughout to convey more emotion from the goings-on. There was some really bad pretend piano playing in one scene, and I can't not mention the scene at the spinning table where the continuity errors are 70s parody movie level of noticeable and really distracting. I feel like that scene wasn't planned out very well at all, and they kind of just rolled the camera and took different takes when they needed to. It didn't feel completely lazy, as the shot composition was still good, but it certainly felt kind of silly and easy to avoid. Sometimes the table would even just stop spinning the fancy food. Like, what? Even though it's a small detail, I really did like the blending of the English and the Chinese language, and even some Japanese to an extent. It certainly helped with the cultural differentiation themes of the movie, with how not extremely well explored they were. This worked particularly well in quite a nice scene at the hospital where Nai is just sitting there and can't hear them talk about her dying. It's quite a sad thing to think about. There are some intentionally kind of goofy and comedic moments that blend in well with the film and never felt out of place. At first, I liked the subtle and ambiguous ending, but then the film kind of sort of ruined it by showing us Nai as alive 6 years later. I understand Time to Live isn't always completely correct, but it does kind of take the emotion away from everything. I don't want her to die, but Billy just driving away and Nai waving goodbye was just so good on its own. I'm keen to see what this director can do in the future, especially as like an Asian woman who clearly knows what she's doing, which is always fun to see in a male-dominated line of work. I don't mean that to sound like ultra-feminist or anything. I love women no matter what slant or anything like that. I just think that more female directors should be given a chance because I like a lot of movies women have made. Like, it's a good movie, alright? Watch it if you want. If it's not your cup of eggplant, then check something else out instead. But I think it's still at least worth one watch down the line eventually. 7 out of 10.
Number 35 is Rocketman, which was directed by Dexter Fletcher.
Taron Egerton is a fucking gem. The Elton John story is interesting. It doesn't fully explore it, but it does explore parts of it that are interesting enough. There are some misinterpretations, but what do you expect? It's a biography movie, not an actual dictionary of their life. I thought some of the musical sequences were great, others not really so great. The one word I use to describe this movie is quirky, because it is very quirky. It touches on the emotions occasionally, it's very funny, there are some surprising moments. I gave it a 7 out of 10.
Number 34 is Hustlers, which was directed by Lorene Scafaria.
I believe the one word I would use to describe it is sassy. It is a very sassy movie with lots of pizzazz. I talked about Hustlers before, I really enjoyed it. Looking back on it, I will admit that it is maybe a little bit cheesy, I guess. I did take my rating down from an 8 to a 7 out of 10. I do still kind of wish it took more of a dramatic turn than a comedic one. It was still a very entertaining movie, bit of a crowd pleaser, nothing all that special, but highly enjoyable.
Number 33 is A Beautiful Day in the Neighbourhood, which was directed by Marielle Heller.
Admittedly heartwarming, which is the one word I use to describe the movie, and quite possibly one of the most perfect castings in the history of cinema. Tom Hanks is unsurprisingly amazing, and the film offers a beautiful message about just being kind to other people without ever becoming pandering. Just be nice and learn to forgive others and control yourself and your emotions if you feel as though you truly can and should. The film is relatively well made with some decent direction, some emotional moments, especially the ending, and some interesting scenes and character interactions, especially whenever it involves Mr. Rogers. I was never really an avid watcher of the show, but I greatly respect the work that went into his career and image and messages. It's actually so refreshing to admire someone without any stories about them noncing on people. It's actually quite amazing, especially with all the special little moments such as the subway scene and the interview scenes being portrayed to us. Everyone else in the movie is just kind of fine. This isn't really a film about Fred Rogers, despite how the advertising may make the film look. He's actually a supporting character above all else. The film actually takes a slightly interesting idea where the whole movie is actually a story on the show about the life of his good friend Lloyd. They even have these really unique little scene transitions where the sets are replaced with models created in a similar style to the show for cars and planes and such. I didn't necessarily have a problem with the arc that our actual main character goes through, but he's just a cynical, selfish dick, and I was largely uninterested in his story. If the film made it more clear that it was actually based on the very personal article written in 1998, then it would have been not much of a problem, but I was so involved in Tom Hanks, I genuinely just wasn't interested unless he was involved. It wasn't even specifically about their relationship, save some chunks of the story. There was a really weird nightmare subconscious sequence that at first felt kind of out of place, but I will admit it grew on me and I enjoyed it a lot. I thought the whole family-friendly storyline and tone blended with the drama quite nicely. The film had some interesting visuals, lovely morals, and an Oscar-worthy supporting role, and I'd probably watch it again. I still haven't seen the documentary, but I will check it out. I'm convinced these biographical films are becoming the new big thing studios are investing in, much like the superhero genre, the same way the Western genre was replaced by the superhero genre. Like most of them, it's nothing special, but it's worth a watch, especially if you're interested in Fred Rogers. After all, it certainly reminds me to have a beautiful day in my neighbourhood. I gave this one a 7 out of 10.
Number 32 is Little Monsters, which was directed by Abe Forsyth.
So the one disappointment is that the title is kind of a lie. Zombie kids aren't really the main attraction of the movie. They are here, but they're not very prominent or any bigger of a threat than in the normal-sized zombies. I think the one word I would use to describe it is just lol. Like, it's pretty funny, I guess. In fact, there was actually a really easy way for children zombies, or little zombies, to be that major of a threat, but they kind of avoided that opportunity. A major theme in this movie is actually protection of children, which is actually quite charming in its presentation. There is a heart to this film that works very well with the comedy presented. It's very immature and mostly vulgar and crass, but I think it works in the movie's favour, and there are some visual gags that worked quite well. There were, of course, some jokes that just didn't hit the mark, but they hardly bothered me at all. It was mostly just fat guy maker funny, I guess. The characters in this film are actually all kind of interesting in their own ways. Lupita Nyong'o fucking kills it, as she usually does with Miss Caroline. She also has a very nice singing voice and was consistently quirky and fun to watch and go along with this journey. The calmness and friendliness of her character was beyond admirable. Alexander England as Dave was pretty entertaining, and I like how he actually learns something and becomes a better person at the end with all the funny, charming, and rock-on dude moments he has. Josh Gad as the sex-addicted children's entertainer Teddy McGiggle / Nathan Schneider was consistently funny and enjoyable. He was kind of just a selfish, dead-inside asshole who cared about himself, and the main source of humour for me was it being Olaf from Frozen. I automatically take this movie up a point due to that and hearing this very American guy call someone a fucking cunt instead of one of the many Australian characters doing it for him. The child actors were all pretty great, with the only bad acting coming from Kat Stewart as Tess, who was mostly pretty good but can't cry for shit. The basic story is Dave is an asshole loser with a girl who just cheated on him for some guy in her workplace. While staying with his sister, he begins to fancy his nephew's kindergarten teacher and decides to join a field trip, only for everything to be ruined by a zombie outbreak. This movie's trailer described it as a zombie comedy like you've never seen or something like that, and I did scoff, but I think I kind of agree. It's not a masterpiece like Shaun of the Dead, but it's very admirable in how strange it is. There were loads of scenes, one with Mr. Giggle in particular, where I was just like, what the fuck? In a good way, though. The comedy is also blended in nicely with some very impressive and suitably grotesque gore scenes, with some of it even being off-screen and left for interpretation. There were some setups to jokes and other events that worked pretty well, including a Darth Vader reference, an allergic reaction, and a frog puppet, amongst others. There were some pointless things, such as the Asian tourist woman who just kind of ran away, met some of her fellow zombified tourists, and disappears, probably dying in the explosion after the kids and teacher and helper escaped. There was also this little baby lamb who just kind of shows up and probably gets blown up off-screen. Like, why didn't the kid Felix just take it with him? He left it there to be barbecued. McGiggle's death scene is probably the best scene in the movie. It ties with this film making me not hate the song Shake It Off by Taylor Swift, which I fucking praise beyond Christian praising God levels. They took that fucking song and they made me like it. Something disappointing about the film's consistently enjoyable and colourful, albeit bloody presentation, was that the cinematography during the hilarious opening credits argument between Dave and his girlfriend was very interesting and well done, but for the rest of the film it was just competent and not really very special. There are plenty of genuinely physically funny scenes to compensate for this disappointment, but it was distracting. Said opening actually kind of felt like an Edgar Wright movie. The key thing in a zombie movie is whether the zombies work or not, and they work pretty well besides the issues with the little monsters part I mentioned earlier. They looked great and they did a funny musical gag with them at the end. This was a very entertaining late night watch, and I can't say I regret just popping it on with nothing else coming to mind. It might just be me, but some additional entertainment came out of the facial similarities between English and Jack Nicholson. I just thought that unintentional visual gag was fucking brilliant. I recommend this for a fun old time, or if you're just excited to see how truly fucking amazing Nyong'o continues to be and will continue to be. I gave Little Monsters a 7 out of 10.
Number 31 is The Last Black Man in San Francisco, which was directed by Joe Talbot.
Yeah, Richie's with me for this one, so do excuse me if he's in the background making weird noises. The one word I use to describe this movie is melancholic. Definitely worth rewatching and solidifying an opinion on this rather melancholic atmosphered film. It has an undeniably high level of charm and a neat little sense of humour that had me chuckling consistently. It's full of emotional, dramatic and rather bleak moments that work pretty well with the admittedly sad and interesting little best friend story that also ties into family and how you view them and yourself. It has a genuinely great score, a naturally gorgeous San Francisco aesthetic, some surprises and oddly nice lighting considering the clearly small budget. There are some social commentaries that don't feel shoved in and actually work really well with the story. Also considering the small budget is the film's very amateur feel. More often than not, the cinematography felt more like stock footage and just felt kind of cheap overall. The acting ranged from pretty weak to genuinely heartfelt and good. Most of these are starting actors from my knowledge, but for a filmmaking debut, the film was pretty solid. There are several interesting shots where their ambition as filmmakers was obvious and they genuinely cared about this project, with some genuinely good writing to match. The characters are understandable, they all work well in the story, and they feel very natural for the most part if you exclude the awkwardness of the actors' weak moments. It helps that the brute characters were portrayed by actual young men who lived in a rough San Francisco neighborhood. The director and some of the other stars are also natives, and they seem to have a clear understanding of the area and what it's truly like to live there, especially when it comes to the horror of expenses and those who sell property. The ending is suitably quite down note, the editing is pretty good, there's an interesting use of slow motion in the opening sequence, which is pretty brilliant as an opening anyways. There are some fun and chill moments. The humor wasn't gut-busting, but it did really add to the charm of the film as a whole and comforted the tone and atmosphere nicely. The film also touches on how lies can just become part of reality and how that can influence a single person who really means no harm. There are some very odd moments here and there that work well. There are some minor details that bring the film down a bit, besides performance and presentation, such as how Jimmy just got all his makeup off and sat down in a pitch black room so quickly and other stuff like that. There's also this one scene that starts off impressively with what's a POV of a rock being thrown, but in the rest of the scene it's very obvious the kids aren't throwing rocks at each other. There's also a really bad edit where it like freeze frames before cutting to the next scene, and I don't think that was intentional. The way the title works in the film's story is interesting. The play subplot as a whole was interesting, as minor as it seemed, and had a worthy payoff, even if it be a tiny bit too short for my liking considering its full potential. I recommend you check this one out when you can. This one gets a 7 out of 10.
Number 30 is 1917, which was directed by Sam Mendes.
The one word is theatrical. If you didn't catch it in theatres, it's your own fault.
Thou hast already spoken of this film, and thou enjoyed and give of 7 out of 10. It's not the best, it's not the worst. I like it a lot. Best sound mixing Oscar award, well earned.
Number 29 is Ad Astra, which was directed by James Gray.
One bit of extra credit I will give this movie is that it's much better when I'm not half asleep and struggling to pay attention. Brad Pitt will always be brilliant and he shines in this movie. He captures the emotionless, level-headed guy perfectly, and when he's supposed to be more emotional and hurt by what's happening around him, he does a good job. Especially during his monologues and when he finally confronts his father, a man haunting him throughout his life and mission to prevent the Earth from being destroyed. There's tons of tense, beautiful shots and interesting interactions between the characters and some genuine suspense throughout, and the beautiful score is especially key in these moments, but it's not without very necessary dead silence here and there. It's very well paced in how slow and building it is, especially towards the admittedly bleak ending where we're left to assume what will happen next to this flawed man who actually completed his mission. The visual effects, practical work and set design were all genuinely solid, and they succeeded in creating this outer space colonized setting. It was actually perfectly sci-fi without being cheesy, fake or anything. It was a perfect construction of what I imagine these kinds of places to look like. The sequence where father and son are together was very interesting, especially after the mystery of whether the dad was even alive or not. The film isn't without its issues. While the narration was certainly effective in some scenes, I often found it to be quite unnecessary and kind of ruined what would have been perfectly good reading of the scene and what's on our main character's mind without telling it to us directly. It's kind of like, okay, we can see and believe without being told. There are also some general things that are just kind of silly, like why do these pirates just go out of their way to kill these people? If they're planning to loot, then they're not going the best way about it. They're kind of idiots, and this makes them less intimidating since they'll just kill without much basic thought of their own final goals. Also, the convoy was oddly unprepared, knowing full danger that was about to come. They also said that the Lima mission lasted 16 years, but Roy mentioned his father left when he was 16 and disappeared when he was 29, which is only 13 years. Maybe I misunderstood, but that was what I heard and it didn't sound right. Also, Diva's face smash death looked pretty fake. Just some imperfections that could have been corrected. Still a banging film that I'd recommend. This one also gets a 7 out of 10.
Number 28 is Daniel Isn't Real, which was directed by Adam Egypt Mortimer.
I spoke of this movie before. It's a good little weird kind of quirky horror movie. There's some disturbing stuff, there's some slightly comedic stuff, there's some genuine kind of cool things in here. I just thought it was entertaining and very enjoyable. It's nice to see Arnie's boy finally get like a proper screen introduction. I think that we've all been waiting for that, and I think this was a good place for him to start. I stand by my 7 out of 10 rating, and the one word I would use to describe it is probably just oh.
Number 27 is I Lost My Body, which was directed by Jeremy Clappin.
More to say in another video, so stay tuned. I gave it a 7 out of 10, and the one word I used to describe it is inventive. A very inventive film, yes.
Number 26 is Bacurau. Bacurau? I don't know, which was directed by Giuliano Dornelles and Kleber Mendonca Filho.
What an interesting little film. What I find most interesting about it is that for a majority of it, very little actually really happens. It's mostly just an insight on a village of people who aren't on the map and effectively live quite a simple life. We're introduced to some interesting characters, some interesting setups such as bullet holes in a water truck and a corrupt politician, and it does offer plenty of thrills and somewhat exciting moments. There's plenty of long, quiet moments that fit the Western, and it offers some great cinematography and a suitably gritty colour to match. Gritty is the one word I use to describe this movie. There's a use of guns, including a very nice custom silver revolver by my personal favourite character in the movie, and some stylized, very bloody moments to match, making this movie all the more of a visual pleasure. Even a machete makes its way into the mix, and someone gets hacked off in a scene that's perfectly more implication than anything else. Seeing someone's head get blown off by a really old, naked man will always be fucking cool no matter what. Most of the acting's pretty great, but I will say that the kid actors are kind of bad for the minimal screen time they had, but thankfully it wasn't much. There was even a really tense moment where one of the kids quietly moves into the darkness, grabs the glitching flashlight, and is shot dead, which is another great example of the implication aspect of the presentation. We don't see this kid just get shot dead, but it is hinted towards us. While the narrative is gritty and pretty cool overall, especially during the last 40 minutes where it pumps up a bit and Lunga is introduced, I will admit that the actual villains in the film are slightly lame. They go for that rich white person who just kill without much reason other than different to us LOL, which can be little more than slightly interesting. Their drone also looks really silly. The design was cool, but it really didn't work when flying about. I think it was either cheap CGI or bad green screen, I'm not sure. It was really fun watching them die and have their heads cut off and put onto the church step, and watching two of them fuck just randomly and the rest of them just get murdered. But I didn't really care, I just enjoyed seeing them die. One kind of neat idea was having two Brazilian natives join this white person pack and get involved, and even steal some kills off of them, but it was kind of unexplored. There was also some slightly strange editing here and there, and a close-up shot on someone's face with stuff in the background that straight up looked kind of terrible. The inclusion of Major Tom Jr., as minimal as it was an interesting idea to have the politician as the main villain at the end, determined to take down the village, being the one behind the chaos. It still didn't really make up for the white people kill aspect, but it was a neat twist, and the film actually managed to trick me into forgetting about him and not predict his involvement. I didn't really understand why German Lad just gave up and tried to kill himself, since none of them really seemed like easy quitters, and some other minor details, such as how one of them just speed walked towards a blood trail to find his friend who would obviously be dead. I know I said implication was great and all, but there was a perfect opportunity to actually use some real violent imagery that would have looked great when two of the hunters died. Regardless, this film wasn't afraid to be more out there with this imagery, going as far as to show as a family slaughtered after an off-screen massacre, and despite my hate for the rich white hunters, I still kind of didn't mind their presence. Despite Lunga's limited screen time, I thought he was nicely set up and well executed anti-hero character. The fact he looks like what one would consider to be something of a mid-20s dreamer rapper type, I thought his presence was earned and heightened the film. It's not a perfect movie, but as a weird western, which I'm ashamed I've never actually heard of before, I think it serves its purpose pretty well. It really flies on by despite the 2-hour runtime, and I recommend you check it out if you can, especially if you're a fan of build-up and then vile execution with a non-violent, very bleak, oddly satisfying ending involving exile by donkey and burying alive.
Number 25 is Greener Grass, which was directed by Jocelyn Dubois and Dawn Luby.
This one deserves its own video. What was the one word? Oh yeah, that's it. That's my one word. ... 7 out of 10, I guess. Thanks.
Number 24 is Jojo Rabbit, which was directed by Taika Waititi.
Very enjoyable, kind of anti-hate satire. Great movie. 7 out of 10. Recommend completely. And the one word I use to describe it is Adolf, because Taika Waititi seriously just steals the show as Adolf Hitler.
Number 23 is Invader Zim, Enter the Florpus, which was directed by Jonan Vasquez.
I just really enjoyed this silly little cartoon movie. It's just really, really enjoyable. Like I said in my review, some annoying humor here and there, but very well animated, very interesting, very just odd, bizarre, strange, and I think an excellent conclusion to a series that was very mistreated by its network. I gave it an 8 out of 10. I still stand by that. It's probably closer to a 7. Like, I would say that Jojo Rabbit definitely comes close to overtaking it in terms of 2019 ranking. That might change in the future if I rewatch both of them simultaneously. The one word I would use to describe it is just Zim!
Number 22 is Diego Maradona, which was directed by Asif Kapadia.
Not really a fan of football or Maradona, and it's not because I'm lacking in athleticism or because he cost England the World Cup by cheating, but mainly because they were never subjects that really interested me, but this documentary kind of got me into it. I really like the story behind this man's life, and even though it drags on a bit in certain places, it was quite engaging. It also doesn't help that his tragic journey feels more like him succumbing to his own ego than it does succumbing to fame and fortune. If you're open-minded, you love to hate Maradona or just love him, then give it a massive watch. There's also some weirdly epic stuff in here, such as a look into the cult-like lives of people in Naples and even the Italian mafia. God? Maybe. Hero? Maybe. Rebel? Most likely. Hustler? Definitely. Memorable documentary with very nice presentation? I think so. The one word I used to describe this movie is laddish, and I gave it an 8 out of 10.
Number 21 is Pain and Glory, which was directed by Pedro Almodovar.
Antonio Banderas is a Spanish icon, both as Puss in Boots and as a homosexual filmmaker who struggles with all of these physical ailments, emotional problems, and an apparent lack of motivation to do what he loves. It works as a character study drama that is very personal to the director. Personal is the one word I use to describe this movie. I'm sure I won't fully understand it until I've seen more of his work, but I reckon I understand it enough to get the emotional weight it holds for him and close fans of his. I was genuinely impressed by the film's very unique style, which was backed up by a suitable moment of various colours and narration that moved the story along nicely. The characters were well written, perfectly performed, and their interactions were interesting, especially between our main character and his heroin-addicted old friend, and the complications that came with how they felt about each other. The film follows this changing timeline perspective where we get views of the character's past, including his childhood and mere years before when his elderly mother lived with him and they went over some of their old problems with one another, and we come to understand more about the character and what he's going through. The score is brilliant, although there are one or two scenes where it felt slightly mismatched with what was going on and it could have been a quiet moment that would have heightened the emotions. The flashback sequences and the reveal of it all being our protagonist working on his next film, something he finally does after getting over everything that's been dragging him down and getting some help, including surgery to remove that awful choking he suffered. It's very excellent. The choice of locations and sets were all really nice, and there are some moments that emphasize relationships and the life of the main character. It never becomes too dramatic for my liking and keeps everything on a good level. There was one shot in this film that weirdly looked like it was on a green screen, which is the only issue I have with the otherwise perfect presentation. I can't say the length was ever a problem and every scene served a purpose. By the time 40 minutes had gone by, I was honestly surprised. It went by at a very smooth pace.
movies. I cared about what was going on, was interested, and even pleasantly surprised at certain points. The monologue theatre scene was genuinely touching and quite impressive as a performance. I would recommend this to anyone looking for a bit of drama mix of some genuinely interesting storytelling, accompanied by a very nice visual style I think anyone with eyes can appreciate. There's something here for a few people, even if you don't fully attach to the personal message it has for the director. I gave this one an 8 out of 10.
Number 20 is Beats, which was directed by Brian Welsh.
The one word I used to describe this movie is seshing, because I genuinely felt like I was part of some kind of quirky little Scottish sesh while watching it, which is a good thing, by the way. Taking place during the legal backlash against the at the time struggling and finishing rave culture, two perfectly mismatched but very close best friends lead a journey to get to raving with some very fun, comedic, slightly dramatic moments sprinkled very nicely throughout. It's not a perfect film, it's very ambitious, but its entertainment value is undeniable, and the actual rave sequence, while brief, is pretty trippy and full of some great visual commentary on Scottish life, as well as just being really great at getting into the mind of someone who's quote-unquote pinging, with some commentary on Scottish life being put throughout the movie as well. If you want a nice best friend's journey, some raw Scottish talent and some interesting conflict that can be a little bit cliched and drawn out at times, then definitely check this one out. I gave Beats an 8 out of 10. Seriously, just watch it, especially if you yourself are a raving type. It is very, very entertaining.
Number 19 is Extreme Job, which was directed by Byung-hyun Lee.
My one word is chicken. 8 out of 10. Good movie.
Number 18 is Us, which was directed by Jordan Peele.
For me, Us was a fascinating movie, and fascinating is the one word I used to describe it, because when it was over, I was just so intrigued by the story and just the concept alone, and it left me with a lot to think about, which I always appreciate about movies. I would love to see some kind of continuation to this, because a lot of people have said that it does kind of dip down a little bit in the second act, and I don't disagree with that. I still thought it was entertaining, but in comparison to everything else, it just kind of lacked. It does pick up again in the third act though, especially with that orchestral cover of I Got Five on it and that dance fight sequence. I mean, even forget that, the entire score is just absolutely fantastic. The twist at the end of the film genuinely dropped my jaw. I was so shocked. I couldn't even leave the theatre, honestly. A lot of people seem to just like some aspects of it and not really like others, but for me, it's most of the package. I could definitely accept this on any delivery day, no matter the inconvenience to my schedule. I gave Us an 8 out of 10. I thought it was fantastic. Genuinely such a good time for horror movies, lots of creative people. I will admit the one thing that genuinely disappointed me about it was that Jordan Peele said that he was going to try and make his next movie more scary and less comedic, but it ended up being that perfect splice of horror and comedy that Get Out was, so I guess you could probably tally that into it, I guess. But that's the question when it comes to marketing, which we're not talking about, thank God.
Number 17 is Shazam, which was directed by David F. Sandberg.
This is my Black Panther. This is my Spider-Man 2. Spider-Man trilogy review coming out soon. Absolutely amazing film. The one word I use to describe it is just nice. It is such a nice, friendly, kind-hearted, just silly little superhero movie. God, I love this silly little movie. Shazam's costume looks kind of ridiculous. The villain is a little bit underexplored, and the CGI it's just kind of bad. But to me, this is a very important seminal film, a step in the right direction for this dying universe, and just so unbelievably entertaining in all the right ways. I more want to talk about the theory I have that Shazam is going to be like this generation's Spider-Man. I don't think it'll be nearly as recognizable or as like famous and culturally historic or whatever, but I think it just kind of fits into that ballpark of Sam Raimi's kind of noteworthily cheesy but still genuinely quite good and very entertaining kind of superhero vibe. Shazam, Spider-Man. It actually works. Do a fucking crossover, alright? There's gonna be a Shazam trilogy. They'll probably make a bunch of Shazam movies. We have the Black Adam, who's like the Venom, Shazam's Venom in a sort of way. And I think everyone should go and see them because they are going to be fun, just like this movie was. It was just fun. Wait, was it fun that I used one word to describe? I can't remember. Wait. No, it was nice. But either way, who cares? If you haven't seen this movie, go and watch it. If you don't want to, then fuck you. If you didn't enjoy it, sure, but like I said, seminal, important movie, not to be forgotten about. I also think it's slightly weird that this very serious Zac Efron looking street kid is like very calm and acts like an adult kind of when he's actually a kid, but when he's Shazam, he's like fucking 12. It's just so silly. I love it. Oh look, I ate cheese review. Worst Kung Fu Panda 2, but I'll take it. It's got 69 comments. lol. Those who call it disposable are just like nothing impressive. I don't completely disagree with you, but this is just what I love. So I gave Shazam a fat 8 out of 10. It's closer to a 9 than a 7, I dare say.
Number 16 is Klaus, which was directed by Sergio Pablos.
And I really, really enjoyed this movie. First and most obvious is the animation and character design is beyond spectacular. Everyone is so wonderful, energetic and smooth, and the voice actors perfectly match their characters with the designs. Some beautiful environments, props and backgrounds are also key in adding to the visual premise. A lot of the visual gags and slapstick were very fun to watch and even made me laugh a bunch of times, with Jesper in particular being a very entertaining character to watch visually. Everyone else had their own unique little quirks and fun moments with the bright colours accompanying them very nicely. While the story and the direction it goes in are familiar, it's not to a point where it's distracting. It's still quite a heartwarming and genuine tale about how one changes and becomes a kind soul after starting off so unbelievably arrogant and unlikable, and the characters work very well with the presentation. Both obvious and subtle setups early on, later tying into the plot were very fun to watch and worth paying attention to. All the voice acting, even for the very small children, was pretty stellar, particularly from Jason Schwartzman, Rashida Jones, J.K. Simmons, and Joanne Cusack. Their characters, plus Klaus himself, were easily my favourites throughout the movie, with consistently remarkable developing personalities, from Klaus, Alva, and Jesper in particular. I love how everything comes together nicely, falls apart in a way that feels natural instead of forced, and then comes back together again, even adding a fun little twist and emotionally heavy ending that was nicely set up very subtly early on. There were some very nice messages about being appreciative of what you earned rather than what's handed to you, from doing little more with your life than just enjoying everything, and it made me enjoy this movie all the more. Although there were some straight up bizarre music choices in certain scenes when the film's already pretty great original score would have been just fine, or some better pre-existing material that wasn't horribly modern. This is essentially what Joker is to the character of Joker, the origin story we've been waiting for. It explores how Christmas came to be, what it was and meant to everyone around it at the time and is to this day, and how it influences the people around the world. As a family-friendly Christmas movie, it serves its purpose remarkably well, although some of the more childish humour, such as drawn-out complaining and mooning, was a bit distracting. I'm really hoping this, like Into the Spider-Verse, will successfully spark a new interest in 2D animation styles, because it deserves the ultimate comeback we've all been waiting for. I'll be watching with the family with completely biased praise towards it. 2020 Christmas, you can no doubt. It's a very small house and it's very loud, but I'm gonna say it anyway. The one word I use to describe this movie is enchanting. It is an enchanting little feature. This little space isn't. I gave Klaus an 8 out of 10.
Number 15 is Knives Out, which was directed by Ryan Johnson.
The one word I use to describe Knives Out is just fun. It is probably one of the most fun movies I saw in 2019. So basically, Ryan Johnson decided he wanted to bring back the whodunit genre into prominence while also putting a modern spin on it, and his talents shine very promisingly in this movie. As a homage, or however you say it, it works very well. It has a very interesting story about a murder, and I honestly had no idea what to even guess was going to happen. Of course, the portrayal of these characters and the roles they play in this story requires some pretty good actors, and I'm happy to say everyone was beyond stellar. Ana de Armas undeniably delivered the best performance in the whole movie. The only person I had a real problem with was Daniel Craig, whose accent was extremely questionable. He just sounded like an English dude trying to pull off a Southern American and failing. Thankfully, you do kind of get used to it as the film goes along, but it just didn't make a lot of sense. Like, why not just make him English? His performance was still great, but that was jarring to say the least. The characters in this movie are very nicely fleshed out and interesting in their own unique ways. Mr. Blanc, Marta, and Ransom were definitely my three favourite characters. There are some very interesting and sometimes extremely subtle setups with very satisfying payoffs that tie into the film's mystery and eventual reveal of the whodunit. Without saying too much, there's the reveal of how Christopher Plummer's character actually died and hints at how it really went down, the confusion of words you and Hugh, minor details from Marta doing an ultimate sneak thief, and the natural devilish nature of spoilt playboy Chris Evans. The screenwriting is very smooth and extremely well crafted. There are a couple of cheesy moments, but I'm sure it's somewhat intentional, as silly as it may be, such as a scene where Marta is obviously lying to Blanc and he just doesn't suspect anything anything and she doesn't vomit. The actions and motivations of everyone made sense, and I was following what was going on very easily. There was one rather convenient payoff to an earlier setup I thought was kind of silly, but it wasn't a major issue, just more of a nitpick. On a technical level, the film is pretty fantastic. The direction is very solid, the shot composition and cinematography are both very impressive, the set design and locations used were very nice, the score was interesting and matched the tone of the film very comfortably. The presentation of the credits in terms of showing the cast and the font choice was very nice. I know that has nothing to do with the actual movie beyond crediting those involved, but it was just really nice to look at after the movie was over. Apparently there are plans to make more movies revolving around the Blanc character. He's not the main or most interesting character, but I would love to see more from this basic world the film is set in. I plan on revisiting this in the future, and knowing everything that happens will definitely heighten the excitement for me personally. I would recommend this to anyone who just wants a simultaneously very fun and very intriguing film to watch. I gave Knives Out an 8 out of 10.
Number 14 is a Shaun the Sheep movie, Farmageddon, which was directed by Will Betcher and Richard Peelan.
Shaun the Sheep is something that's been special to me from a very young age, and I loved the summertime fun that was the first movie almost as much as Chicken Run. Almost. This movie doesn't fail to deliver the exact same charm and splendour that Aardman has been known for all these years. They even managed to put in a scatological joke with a robot that didn't put me off, and a Wallace and Gromit's Grande Out reference that relates to the sci-fi theme and takes us back to where it all began with those two iconic characters that introduced Shaun to the scene in the first place. The opening scene perfectly captures and puts a funny spin on that alien encounter horror cliche, and within the first 10 seconds, I was smiling, because I was simply happy to know I was watching this film, especially after watching the Addams Family, which was so lacking in speciality, it made this look like fucking Taxi Driver. My main issue is there are some conveniences to the story sprinkled throughout sometimes, but the attention to detail, constant chuckles through visual gags, and genuine humour is of such a kind-hearted detail. This movie is gladly something I will return to if I'm ever feeling down. It's so undeniably warm-hearted, cute, and kind of magical for all the right reasons. It's not something to forget. I love Shaun, I love the farmer, I love the villain who's just a tormented soul looking for answers. I love the pizza boy voiced by Joe Sugg just doing the typical grunts, which is hilarious. I even kind of like the modern pop songs heavily featured, which was sometimes just a little bit distracting when reminding myself this is a stop-motion film about sheep. And the score used in the show is significantly better. And the first movie only used one pop song consistently, but I guess it wasn't unbearable. One could argue that Bits' meanie-headedness was a bit too much to bear, but it still had a point to the story and played into some scenes well, and he did progress as a character by the end. I also love how for every bad thing that happens, it never feels mean-spirited because of the way it's delivered to be like the goofy accident it is. Fabulous, wonderful film that is beyond the storytelling and visual pleasure that even the most cold-blooded and heartless of people can sit down and at least appreciate for a moment. If you don't like this movie, then please just don't speak to me. Cheers. Kiss, hug, kiss, hug. The one word I used to describe this movie is empowering, and I gave it an 8 out of 10. It's probably even closer to a 9 than a 7, I dare say.
Number 13 is Sorry We Missed You, which was directed by Ken Loach.
I really hate to sound cynical, but I've been working on this video for ages, and I just really want to get this over with. This is a very special film. The one word I use to describe it is real. It takes British life and presents it in a very interesting, very real way that never feels forced or overdramatic. Every personal problem and tragic event the characters get into, the reasons and the ways they fight, and the constant fear and need to get things done for the sake of their family are all very important details to the story. The character progression, whether it be from bad to better for Seb, who realises how selfish and troublesome he is, or good to bad for Ricky, a man who falls so far for the sake of those he loves, is very nice to watch play out. It's not shot in a particularly special way, but it doesn't need to be, especially with how much that ironically adds to the film. It also has a lot to say about what a struggle it really is for people to just live a normal 4-person household life. There are some unlikable or slightly annoying characters thrown in who make you ask questions more than get completely annoyed at them. When I say thrown in, I mean thrown in naturally, not like, oh, they're so thrown into the movie. There are some very satisfying moments, such as Ricky just going out on a bitchy client over a phone, and even some humorous moments, such as a dog taking a bite out of Ricky's ass and some genuine family moments to be had. They might gradually get worse and worse, but there's still that love they all share until the very end, where Ricky knows no matter what he has to keep going, even after being beaten to a pulp and not even waiting to get his x-rays back. That's just the reality of the situation.
All the acting is brilliant, with the little girl even being able to convince the audience with some genuine young person charm and emotion on display. The only issue I have with the performances are where the actors mess up their lines. For some like Abby, it made sense considering that her, the one who stays collected for the most amount of time, minus some breaking down until that moment when she finally justifiably flips out in the NHS waiting room, would stumble over her words. And then there was one other occasion where someone's odd line delivery matched their character, but there were also moments where it felt less natural and worth a quick retake. The good most definitely outweighs the bad and stamps on its head 50 times. I just want to make that clear. With some commentary on mobile phones and how parents and kids interact with one another actually being remarkable, and not in the slightest bit cringeworthy or pandering for the worst reasons. The writing is extremely solid. The dialogue, actions, and even one of the main characters being arrested were all very grounded and real. This movie knew what it was doing and how to do it just right, and that is straight up fucking brilliant and admirable filmmaking 101. Another small problem with this movie is that with phones being a major part of Seb's character and even leading nicely into the film's tragic conclusion, there's this really odd scene where it's made clear he spent time uploading a video he filmed on his phone onto his computer, and I believe he played it off of a VLC file just so he could show his little sister, when it would have made more sense and been slightly more interesting to look at it if he showed her on his phone. It still was a nice scene, just like every other scene in the movie, and the relationship between Seb and his friends, while brief, was interesting and even had some elements that related to me somewhat, and that was a good way to introduce us to the boys and gal. Massive nitpick, but I did notice one single moment where the audio editing wasn't perfect. There are no points taken off for that specifically, just another reason to crucify myself. To be honest, I even had a blast watching the scenes where Abby was looking after her clients, almost like they're all some kind of secondary family to her, and the struggle she goes through with public transport as a way to help her husband with his job is nice to see. No one is really to blame, so they all have to try their best. This film is depressing, charming, and harsh reality all at their finest, and I cannot recommend it enough. I originally gave it a 9 out of 10, but then I bumped it down to an 8. Still a brilliant movie and one of the best of the year. Check it out whenever you can. Number 12 is Marriage Story, written and directed by Noah Baumbach,
which is a movie that, while I do actually love quite a lot, I still have very mixed feelings on. My main attraction to this movie is that it takes two of my most favourite actors, Scarlett Johansson and Adam Driver, and it puts them in a movie together, and it actually puts a twist on it. It doesn't put this, like, kind of exciting relationship together. It kind of hints at it being together and then just breaks it apart, which I find fascinating in itself. The screenplay is inherently fantastic. All the writing, all the dialogue, everything, almost everything, pretty much. All of the actors in the movie, literally everyone, gives the best of their abilities, and they just deliver stellar, really memorable performances. They're all very well cast. There is a very well cast, very well acted movie, that is for sure. There's some sharp comedy that's kind of put in with this very compelling drama story. It is just a really good, very real story. I think the one word I use to describe this movie is human. It has a very gentle, enjoyable score that I loved, and it really matched the scenes and heightened the emotion for me personally. The direction is obviously pretty fantastic. I have seen the movie twice, and the first time I saw it, I think I probably slightly enjoyed it more than the second time, because as I said, I do have some mixed feelings about this movie, but I would still probably give it a relatively high rating, and it's easy to say that I do love it quite a lot, because as much as this movie does frustrate me and just piss me off and make me angry, it does kind of make me love it just all that much more and think of it as being all the better. What I really love about the movie is that it constantly flip-flops between who you feel more sorry for and who you kind of hate more. I personally just cannot stand that just snide attitude that someone gives someone who they either used to be closely associated to or are currently, but they're kind of in the middle about it. They're like, maybe you should just go do that. Like, I genuinely despise that kind of attitude, especially in situations like this. But at the same time, I feel really bad for this character. I understand she's been through a lot of pain, and the same qualifies to the other guy. He is very selfish, and it's evident that he's really stubborn, and he's kind of out for himself a lot of the time. And at the same time, he's going through a lot. I still feel very bad for him. I kind of hate the woman for doing this to him, and I kind of think he's a bit of a dick for
doing all these supposed things. They're both right and they're both wrong for different reasons. They both make perfectly valid points. They both have some constructive arguments to deflate the other's points. It is a very impressive kind of dynamic. Everyone else besides the two main characters are pretty great. G-Ma was easily my favourite supporting character, and as I said before, the actress did a good job. The kid actor even did a pretty good job. I think he really did capture what it is like for a kid going through something like this. He doesn't really know how to feel. It's kind of more what is there for him and how it is, what quality it is. How is this school compared to this one? How is this Halloween costume compared to that one? How's what my mum is buying me compared to what my dad is buying me? All the theatre group characters, especially the man played by Wallace Shawn, were actually very entertaining. As a Mighty Boosh fan, it was indescribably epic to see Rich Fulcher as the judge for a brief time. Ray Liotta was absolutely great and his character was really entertaining, as was the assistant who hung out with him all the time. I think his name was Sam. He had a kid called Fred, but was very likeable and entertaining. He left an impact despite not even being in the film all that much. He said some things that kind of stuck to me a little bit. I'm actually quite surprised that Julie Haggerty, who played G-Ma, didn't actually get nominated for the Best Actress. Like, I actually thought that she was a million times better than Laura Dern, despite not even being in the movie that much. And I really, the first time watching this, disliked her performance. I thought it wasn't good, just not good, kind of bad. But I find Nora so genuinely infuriating and TV kicking that I realised it wasn't a problem with the performance. The performance from Laura Dern is actually pretty good. I personally don't think it's perfect, even after a second watch evaluation, but I do think it is still good and suits the character. It's just the character herself is just so incredibly unlikable and just fills me with fury. Like I said, at the same time, that does make me appreciate the film more, but my problem with someone like Nora is for an intentionally unlikable character to work, at least for me, there has to be something interesting about them. I don't find a single thing about Nora interesting. She's very much just a typical soulless lawyer woman who I just don't care about. That you could just fucking kill her and it would make no difference at all. One could easily say the same about Ray Liotta's character, but he actually comes across to me as a somewhat interesting, charismatic, convincing, evil kind of lawyer archetype. Literally just fuck off is all I could think when Nora did anything at all. There are also a whole bunch of moments in this movie where I couldn't help but just kind of imagine it being more interesting. Like I said, it doesn't really take a point off or anything, but it's just like I couldn't help imagine certain scenes. For example, there's this one part where Nicole is saying these absolutely terrible things when preparing for what she's going to say to the Child Protective Agency woman who's going to come see her son. And sure enough, there are some questionable mothery things that she does, such as yelling, drinking too much, a bit of pot every now and then. Ooh, that would have any legal person being like, your kid will be taken away from you because of this. It will actually go to this very difficult, constantly nationwide moving theatre director, you know? And I would have found the movie all the more interesting if it actually turned out she was saying all this stupid, regrettable shit to some kind of legal person. It's kind of fucking twisted, but I genuinely just could not help but think this. I genuinely would have found it more interesting if Charlie just up and fucking killed himself at the end. It would have been sadder, it would have been kind of weirder, more unexpected. I'm happy with the ending, I really am. Actually, the ending and the beginning actually merge together so nicely that it is essentially a perfect beginning and wrap up. But just that idea was just floating in the back of my mind, and also I kind of thought it was kind of an obvious thing to do, or it would be rather, but I don't know, it's just me using my brain to stir things up in my mind. For some reason the film just made me want to do it. There are also just some minor things about the movie that I don't really like. Like, for example, the kid, I kind of hate him sometimes, as much as I understand what it's trying to say and everything. It's definitely not Nora levels, which is like down here. I'd say the kid is about there compared to that. I get that your dad did make you carry all that shit, but maybe wait until you sit down in the car to eat your fucking burger,
because it was made very obvious he was trying to fucking eat it while walking away. Even I wasn't that greedy when I was 8, and I haven't stopped eating since I was like fucking 3. And the ending, like, especially when followed by the film's nightmarish, stressful reality of a family falling apart, is actually kind of heartbreaking. Also, this movie has a wall punch. Like, you cannot just get over that. That is just brilliant. I also really like the scene with that woman, Nancy Katz. That scene alone is just absolutely incredible. From him just awkwardly getting her a glass of water to accidentally just slicing his arm with that fucking knife. My only other kind of actual technical issue with the movie is that there are, I think I counted 3 scenes with really noticeable ADR. For those of you who don't know, is alternative dispute resolution, where there's like an obvious failed edit, or there's like really bad audio differences. 2 being audio, and oddly enough to do with Nora, my least favourite character, and 1 just being a really bad edit during a really funny kitchen scene that was distractingly messy in terms of continuity. I did actually think the way the movie played out overall was quite smooth. One problem I really have with the movie is that I think it was kind of a bit too hyped up for me. Like, I have all these people saying, yeah, it's like you're looking into a window, like you're seeing something actually happening. And while the editing wasn't bad, save for that moment I just mentioned, but the kind of quick cutting, it was good, but I did not get the same feeling of looking into a relationship like a real thing. I felt like I was watching a movie, a very human, like I said, my one word to describe it, real movie nonetheless, but still a movie. It has a very interesting personality. Like, the color palette is really nice, the shots are nice, there's some really interesting camera very smoothly moving around kind of stuff in there. It's bittersweet, it's dramatic, it's sad, it's kind of heartbreaking. All I can say to this movie is thank you. You made something kind of frustrating that I love, and you put a wall punch in there also, and you took Adam Driver and Scarlett Johansson, literally 2 of the best people I can fucking think of, and you made an excellent movie with them, and thank you. I think I gave it an 8 out of 10. I don't know, it's probably closer to a 7, definitely not a 9, but it's kind of in that limbo, I guess.
Number 11 is Joker, which was directed by Todd Phillips.
For those of you who know me, you know that I'm a big fan of the Joker. He's my favourite supervillain, at least from DC. I even did my own makeup for him at school one time. I wore a Joker mask to the first time I saw the movie. I saw it 2 other times in cinemas, and I saw it once on TV so far with my mum because she hadn't seen it yet. A lot of you might think that it's like my favourite movie ever made or something. Not really. For those of you who have seen my YouTube video, you know I do have some issues with it. I still stand by some of those issues. It can be a little bit cheesy. The narrative isn't the strongest, but I just genuinely love it. It's a very entertaining kind of breath of fresh air from all this schmaltzy crap we get every year. I love Shazam, I loved Infinity War, I love Spider-Man, but this was genuinely nice to see. It's still an 8 out of 10. I will admit that people maybe overhyped this movie just a tiny bit. It's not a masterpiece, but it is pretty great. The one word I use to describe it is simply wonderful. It actually had quite an impact on me. I genuinely appreciate it. And you know what? It actually encouraged me to go out of my way to watch Taxi Driver and The King of Comedy. 2 movies that I do think are better than Joker, but on its own, I still think Joker is a great movie. They are also fantastic films, and I highly recommend you check them out. Maybe check them out before Joker, because I feel like you might get a lot more enjoyment out of all 3 of them. I'd say they work as a trilogy in a funny kind of way.
Number 10 is The Beach Bum, which was directed by Harmony Korine.
Came close to just ditching this one with some cynical little shove-in, but I'm just going to say right here, right now, that I like this director. If you want something different, like weird, out there, very funny, and just kind of carefree, like very flowing naturally, like when human minds just relax, and that's what I love about this movie, then you should watch this movie. It is a movie for literally any mood. You can just do it. It's honestly amazing. Matthew McConaughey's character and his performance really embodies that. Every other character is basically like, the actor is tailored specifically to be that character, except Jonah Hill. He's awful in this movie, which is very disappointing because I usually like Jonah Hill, I definitely have more to say about it in the future. Zac Efron, Snoop Dogg, and Martin Lawrence are easily my favourite performances besides Matthew McConaughey as like supporting characters. The one word I would use to describe it is different, because like I said, it is a very different film. This section's a little bit rambly, but I really do want to talk about it more because I really loved it. I gave it an 8 out of 10. It's closer to a 9 than a 7.
Number 9 is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which was directed by Quentin Tarantino.
One word I would use to describe this movie is charming. It is my 9th favourite Tarantino film, which does include movies written by him also. I gave it an 8 out of 10, and I have a lot more to say about it in the future, so stay tuned.
Number 8 is Waves, which was directed by Trey Edward Schultz.
Again, this isn't me being lazy, just... This movie, just I think it deserves its own video. Like, seriously, I know my selecting of like what does and doesn't deserve its own video is very strange, but this is just how I'm doing it. This deserves its own video. I really like this movie. It's not like manipulative. It just tells you its story and it's great. It does kind of lack in just a few places, but that's literally only enough to take it from like a 10 to a 9. It is a 9 out of 10 movie. It is like... The one word I use to describe it is brilliant. The one word I use to describe it is brilliant, you fool. Not excellent. That is how much I enjoyed it. It's very... It kind of has like moments of being chill, but then it just suddenly becomes like really just wow. And it's like, fucking hell. Just really like... just thinking about it, it's just strange. Like, it just happened. It just comes to my mind. Oh, I just want to make a solo video on this. And for these videos, I'm promising, I have no idea when, but maybe this one sooner than others. Waves is a movie that really interests me. Good movie, check it out, very entertaining. I think maybe if you live in America, it's probably more personal to you, but as like someone in a similar age to these people, I was still able to like kind of click with it, I guess.
Number 7 is The Irishman, which was directed by Martin Scorsese.
I think the best way to describe this movie is a more calm, aged version of Goodfellas, and I mean that in the best way possible, considering it literally captures everything great about a Scorsese movie on that level. Well, almost everything. It feels almost like a beautiful goodbye from everyone involved because they're so old now and won't be around much longer. The one word I use to describe this movie is emotional, because it actually kind of tugged at my heartstrings in that way. The acting is undeniably stellar from just about everyone. The cinematography and presentation of everything on camera is beautiful. The facial CGI is perfected and it's nothing but brilliant production, and you should tune in for the 3 long hours required to enjoy it. I think the only major issue of this movie, and it is a minor one, but it is one that does take that score down just a little bit, is while Robert De Niro looks young in the early years, as do others, there are moments where it's painfully obvious their bodies are aged in, like, you know, walking, kicking, running. They are 70 years old. They're still fantastic, and as the film goes on, they do kind of grow into what they are now, and they are all very talented old fellas with fantastic careers. I mean, Robert De Niro's career is mostly fantastic, but, you know, still fantastic nonetheless. Also very funny is I noticed that Cuck somewhat just completely ripped off one of the poster designs. Like, what the fuck? I don't even think it was ripped off. I think it was just a sad coincidence. I don't know. I'm just happy that The Irishman is part of those fantastic careers. A streamable cinematic treasure to truly behold. And I gave The Irishman a 9 out of 10.
Number 6 is Uncut Gems, which was written and directed by the Safdie brothers, Benny and Josh.
Now this is a motherfucker that deserves its own video. 9 out of 10. And I use one word, and that is eventful. Because that is what it fucking is. It is fucking eventful. Like, the moment this film fucking opens up after that chaotic, tense as hell Ethiopian mining incident, we come out of a man's colon, like a potentially damaged colon, which just represents how tense our rectums will be throughout this entire journey. And that symbolism was not wrong, intentional or not.
Number 5 is Parasite, which was directed by Bong Joon-ho.
Everybody already knows how fucking brilliant this film is. I don't need to tell you. It deserved Best Picture, it deserved Best Original Screenplay. Didn't get any Best Actor or Actress Supporting Anything nominations, which is fucking bullshit. What I will say about this movie and how it personally affected me was while I do prefer the movies that are about to come, which are horror movies, 2 are at least, this movie, Parasite, had the scariest moment of the entire year for me, and it's when those fucking eyes come out of that pitch black fucking basement. I just... Nightmares that night. And the next one. And tonight. The one word I use to describe this movie is epic.
Number 4 is The Peanut Butter Falcon, which is directed by Tyler Nilsson and Michael Schwartz.
Genuinely quite a fantastic film. I loved it to pieces from the moment it started. The one word I would use to describe it is excellent. It really is quite inspiring. All the performances are brilliant, with maybe one kind of exception, which is just good. My main issues with it are very minimal. I will have more to say about it in the future. I gave it a 9 out of 10, and I would definitely recommend it to any film lover.
Number 3 is Portrait of a Lady on Fire, which was directed by Celine Sciamma.
When I first saw this movie, I was flustered, honestly. If you've ever wanted to see the beauty of a painting in the moving images of a movie, then here you go, essentially. With actual paintings by a very talented Helene Delmer, cinematography, direction, writing, sound design, atmosphere, and especially performances and characters, mainly from our leading ladies, Adele Haenel and Noémie Merlant. French people, man. As wonderful as this, it doesn't really get any better. Films of 2019, I would say this is probably directly on par with the 2 to come. Second or third, rather, to them only because of my love for the weird and creepy things over the admittedly rather normal relationship of 2 emotional women in a time that simply doesn't accept the way they truly feel about themselves and one another. It's the masterful way in which the story is executed that makes it worthy of anyone's time. Even raging anti-artistic expression people who don't believe stuff like this even deserves to be made would look at it and admit that it's at least serviceable. I could drone on for at least half an hour. What I will say is that it is a definite recommend, and I actually logged it twice, because I've seen it twice, just to affirm my love for it, and in my second log, I literally just said, okay, now this is spectacular. Spectacular is actually the one word I used to describe this movie, and I'm giving this one a 10 out of 10.
Number 2 is Midsummer, which is directed by Ari Aster.
This next little audio bit is in chronological order of editing, not in chronological order of the video you're watching. I'm going to be doing this bit with a clip or some video or something to playing, because I cannot be bothered to just keep showing my face in this fucking video. Midsummer is one of those movies where it takes a genre and basically puts it on its ass and tells it how it's going to get things done. It completely betrays the dark, mysterious setting most successful horrors go for, with their various creepy places the characters find themselves in, and instead sets itself during a beautiful and very warm Swedish summer in a glorious rural area, backed up by some amazing cinematography with pretty much every shot having something to look at, sometimes very smooth and other times psychedelic imagery editing that perfectly matches what certain substances do to you, and a score that perfectly supports the tone and atmosphere of the entire premise. It is extremely impressive how creative and fresh this movie is with how it does all these things simultaneously. I felt very disturbed, although not necessarily scared throughout the whole ordeal, although I don't think the movie was trying to be all that terrifying. Kind of like Hereditary, it relied more on the dramatic and more deep aspects of the story and characters. By the way, I would strongly recommend Hereditary for a truly interesting horror character development experience. Also, similar to previous effort by this talented director, there are tons of little secrets that lead to pretty satisfying reveals later on in the film. I go as far as to say that this was a high improvement over Hereditary and essentially becomes a perfect film in its execution. The way it very cleverly manipulates you into thinking this is a happy affair before becoming completely disturbing is just genius, honestly. The odd and bizarre way everything was designed gave implications of this messed up paganist cult trying to hide how truly awful things are, and even then they're probably not even aware of that. Obviously knowing something is going to go wrong doesn't take away from the experience, because it's always a matter of how something will happen, not necessarily if it will. The way it unfolds is genuinely quite building on that feeling of being anxious, the way each character gets sucked into their fate, almost always at their own hand and no one else's, was genuinely brilliant to watch unfold out. Danny, who objectively gets it the best, embraced the love, Christian gave in to his desires, Josh was too ambitious, Connie was too anxious, Simon was too reactive, Mark was just too much of an asshole, and his fate was probably the best set up in its oddly quirky nature. All the characters were well defined and made sense. I especially appreciated the dynamic between Danny and Christian and the gradual unfolding of the latter's true nature and determination. It actually felt like a real relationship that was genuinely believable. The film, and I mean this in a good way, itself felt like a relationship that barely stuck together to begin with and gradually just fell apart, with each layer slowly peeling away as their relationship and the story itself becomes more and more twisted. It definitely helped that Florence Pugh, I'm just going to call her Florence Pugh, was easily one of the best performances I've seen all year and stood out like a piece of shiny gold amongst dirty silver. I'm not saying everyone else was bad. Pretty much everyone was fantastic. I thought Jack Rayner wasn't particularly great, to be honest, and I wasn't that surprised to be reminded that he was in Transformers 4. He was actually pretty great when having a bad trip and good when interacting with Danny, but the rest of the time he was just bad. Originally, I saw this as an issue and my score of the film was 1 point lower, but I actually came to appreciate how bad his acting was, intentional or not, because it actually made his character more unlikable in a good way, and incidentally made his sexual assault and death all the more of a joy to watch. Everyone was great when they were on drugs, and the pupil dilation effect was a nice detail. Not all the characters were very well developed, but they didn't really need to be. They served their purpose and they served it well. It remained grounded and was never comical. There were plenty of scenes that could have easily been passed off as goofy, but it managed to just be great instead. They were all very disturbing, especially the cliff falling and the reveal of everyone's gruesome deaths and sacrifice purposes. My favourite visual foreshadow was the story of making one fall in love with you, which later resulted in the fate of the very intentionally awful Christian, who I was anticipating would be taken care of in a satisfying way, and I was not disappointed. Him being looked at while running around naked, seeing corpses of people he knew, and then being paralysed, stuffed, and left to burn was not one where I felt bad for him in a very good way. The opening scene is easily the best part of the movie. It's a massive punch directly into all vital internal organs where this awful thing happens to Danny and screws with her mind, setting up that inevitable moment where she is the new admired queen of the Swedish cult, the only place that actually makes her feel somewhat comfortable after all she suffered with her bipolar sister's suicide and murder of her parents, both by the same car exhaust method, might I add. It's so perfectly bleak and hard-hitting, and it really helps with the interactions and behaviour of the characters. The movie was very fast-paced for me. It was 2.5 hours long, but it felt much shorter. It focuses heavily on character and build-up. For the conclusion itself, I don't really know what I was expecting beyond something well shot, and it wasn't that scary, but I did feel some emotion, and I appreciated the implication of breaking off each toxic element represented in the deceased characters' personalities by literally incinerating them. At first I was like, okay, well, this isn't really anything we haven't seen before, and it's not really that disturbing. But it did catch my attention. The second time watching this movie, I actually stopped watching towards the end and saw some scenes from the director's cut, and I implemented them into the film using my mind, and I thought they worked extremely well, and they really added a lot and heightened the film incredibly. Also, while watching a specific point, I was in a certain type of pain, combined with knowing what is about to come as I'd already seen it before, added a lot to the tension for me personally. As done to death as the conclusion to this movie may be for this particular genre at least, it was still very effective the more I thought about it, and those pagans feeling the pain of their two volunteers is genuine, as is Danny's sadness slowly turning into joy. I did complain about it, but being burnt to death will always be something scary to me no matter what. It is done to death, yes, but this movie just did it in such a captivating way. Fucking loved Midsummer, and I'm giving it a 10 out of 10. Second movie of the year, fuck you. The one word I used to describe it is eerie.
And my number one favourite movie of the entire year is The Lighthouse, which was directed by Robert Eggers.
It's not every day you see a perfect movie. It's not every day you see a movie that seems like it was made specifically for the kind of movie fan that you are. This is one of those movies. It is superb. It is wonderful. It is amazing. It is the thing
It is any 1940s horror drama, or 1930s horror drama, or at least the best parts of them. It's any strange psychological kind of horror thriller type. It's any severe isolation, like I just said, The Thing. It is wonderful. The Lighthouse is basically what you get when you combine a gripping story, excellent cinematography, two of the most talented actors currently living, and a genuinely eerie, creepy, and emotionally distressing tone and vibe all in one. A brilliant psychological peer, kind of, into the lives of two isolated individuals and the horrors of their own company, with said journey being what is objectively the best movie of the year. Everything about the film is perfect. The best part of the film is definitely how the characters work. Not only from the first full view of them do we understand the sense of dread that comes with seeing a ship that just drops you off already so far away, but the borderline grotesque, grumpy, yellow-toothed, and just jaded old nature of Thomas Wake serves as a perfect build-up to the inevitable slip of Ephraim Winslow, who provides a very necessary and impressively structured counterbalance as the quiet, almost self-contained underling. From the beginning, it's made clear that this seemingly altogether young man has moments where he just can't take it, no matter how hard he tries to keep it together. On the first night, he sees something so surreal it can't be real. But maybe it is. There are themes of sexual deprivation that go as far as to masturbating to a miniature mermaid statue, and it has the two men sharing what is almost a straight-up homosexual moment. We even get disturbing hints at aquatic fetishism and kind of messed up things that turn on the deteriorating mind of Winslow. We see a lot of naked Thomas and how the light of the made-for-film lighthouse appears to affect the way the two men think. There's something about the light, the one non-shitty thing about this place, that is just so appealing and adds to Winslow's frustration as he isn't even allowed near it. It belongs to Thomas. It also doesn't help Thomas has some kind of personality problem and is always switching between nice and naughty. But then again, that plays into what is real about what Winslow is perceiving and what he isn't, as it's made very clear later on that Winslow is either playing himself or Thomas does in fact have this vile tendency to manipulate and confuse him for the weak-minded fool he might very well be. He can't even remember what a woman really looks like and sees a fish in place of its key attraction to a straight man, the vagina. There's a whole bunch of disturbing details and imagery besides the tentacle fetish stuff that works quite well for the story. As it goes in, it becomes less about sexual deprivation and trying to keep calm and sane, and more about the way the mind tortures itself about past trauma. Thomas has this shrouded mystery of another second he is very vague about, and these absurd beliefs about goals being those who came before him, and Winslow was this lumberman who allowed a fellow person to die without even trying to help him. This also adds to the feeling of purgatory, as if these two men were put here to wait and see where they can be sent to, and it all ends with them being tormented. It tests who to feel more sympathy for, switching between who is suffering the most, very carefully, but very noticeably confusing you in a good way. It plays with the emotions, kind of like how they play with each other's and their own emotions. The goal-smashing scene will be lingering in the back of my mind for a while, as will the frustration of getting shit all over you and trying to throw it over the cliff. The use of the unique, almost square 1.19 to 1 aspect ratio immediately sets the claustrophobic atmosphere that helps you feel the confinement of the desolate island and closed-off isolation of the characters. The entire movie is set in one location, which could potentially be a challenge to keep interesting, but with every movie I've seen that does it right, this is on par with many classic examples. The shot composition, blocking, lighting, editing, sound design, and basically every element behind the production is mysterious and beautiful enough to keep it compelling for the entire runtime. The drunk scenes are definitely my favourite. They really emphasise all of the film's key themes and character insights that we need to become further invested into the story. It's a good old-fashioned watch, and it's fascinating to think about and study carefully. What a time for horror movies to exist, with so many unique visions on display, and this film is definitely up there with one of the best I've ever seen. Not just modern horror, but horror as a whole. It often reminded me of The Thing, such as the opening title and the isolated feeling, and even the use of some impressive practical effects in the later scenes. And that's enough for me to love any film.
I'm going to give The Lighthouse a 10 out of 10.
And that's it. I'm done. Alright, I am finished. No more movies from 2019, except the ones I'm making future videos on. I don't know when it'll happen. No more fucking keeping a track record of every single movie I see at every second. I'm going chill now. I'm taking few day breaks between watching movies. It started becoming more of a proving I've done something than actually enjoying it thing. Now it's going back to being an enjoying it thing, and I'm happy about that. Like, it's all good. Okay, I'm gonna finally cut my nails. I'm gonna start rendering the video. It's gonna be out there. And just I don't even know, man. Jesus, I might never do this again. Fuck me. This is just a hobby. I've taken it like some kind of holy thing that I had to complete. And I am proud of that, actually. I really am. Actually got my first proper long-ass video out. I guess you could say the Psycho video counts, but like, I think I'm more proud of this one. If we can hit at least 9 dislikes, I'll be very grateful. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, should you wish. And, I don't know.
Bunny say bye-bye. Bunny say bye-bye.
I said bye-bye, bitch.
I don't fucking know.
Great Man! It's Filthy Frank, motherfucker! It's Filthy Frank, bitch!
Let's get some pussy tonight.